Gymnastics is meant to inspire awe, but beneath the glittery and flawless routines hides a harsh reality. A single mistake can be catastrophic. These athletes test the limits of their bodies, balancing on beams no wider than a handspan or launching themselves from bars towering high above the mat. And sometimes, the sport they dedicate their lives to becomes deadly. These are the stories that shake us, not just because of how these lives were lost, but because they show just how fragile even the strongest truly are.
Townsville was last month found guilty of breaches after the death of a 19-year-old gymnast in June last year. Michelle Maitland fell and hit her head on a section of concrete.
June 18, 2009, Townsville, Australia. The night started like any other. 19-year-old Michelle Maitland bounded out the front door, calling back to her mother, "Are we having that steak when I get home?" She never waited for an answer and she never came back. That was the last time her mother would hear her voice. Inside the Aitkenvale gym, the familiar rhythm of practice filled the air. Feet hitting mats, bodies flipping, coaches shouting encouragement. But on that night, one misstep, one overlooked detail, would turn routine training into tragedy. Michelle, determined and focused, attempted a backward twisting layout, a move meant for elite gymnasts. She soared into the air, body spinning, heart racing. For a fleeting moment, everything seemed perfect. Then, disaster struck. Instead of landing on the safety of padded mats, Michelle crashed headfirst onto bare concrete. A section of the floor that should have been shielded by meters of protective matting had been left exposed. There was only half the required padding. Her skull collided with the unforgiving surface with catastrophic force. The sound echoed like a grim warning through the gym. Coaches and teammates rushed to her side, but it was too late. Rushed to Townsville General Hospital. Michelle's condition was critical. Her family clung to hope, but by the next day that hope had vanished. Michelle was gone. A bright, laughing daughter, sister, and friend had been taken in the most preventable way imaginable. Investigations revealed chilling negligence. Her coach wasn't qualified to teach the move she attempted. Someone had moved the mat earlier and failed to replace it. No one double-checked. And because of that single lapse, Michelle lost her life. Her mother, Anne, later recounted the horrifying truth. Her skull was smashed to smithereens. Words no parent should ever speak. The tragedy sent shockwaves through Queensland. Safety audits across gymnastics clubs exposed alarming deficiencies. Only 8% of facilities had adequate measures to prevent contact with hard surfaces. Many gyms operated with unqualified coaches, poor planning, and unsafe equipment. Michelle's death wasn't a freak accident. It was a disaster waiting to happen. Townsville Gymnastics was eventually fined $70,000 for breaching safety obligations. But for Michelle's family, no fine, no report, no punishment could restore what was lost. Anne called it bitter justice. "I wasn't expecting her not to come home," she said quietly, still grappling with the weight of such preventable loss. On what would have been Michelle's 22nd birthday, her family gathered outside the same gym, lighting candles in the dark. Each flickering flame was a tribute, a warning, a reminder of a life cut far too short. Anne's plea to others was stark and urgent. Don't take the manager's word for it. Check for yourself. Michelle had returned to gymnastics not as a competitor chasing medals, but as a young woman reclaiming a passion she loved. She wasn't seeking fame, just joy, yet her story became a haunting testament to what can happen when safety is ignored. A chilling reminder that behind every flip, every landing, the smallest oversight can turn deadly.
This was sentencing day for the woman accused of killing her sister and 5 other people in a wrong-way drunk driving crash.
It was the early morning of February 9th, 2014, in Diamond Bar, California. 21-year-old Olivia Carolee Culbreth, a young mother from Fontana, had given birth just 11 days earlier. But instead of being home with her newborn, she made a choice that would end in one of the most devastating wrong-way crashes California had ever seen. At around 4:40 a.m., Olivia climbed into a red Chevrolet Camaro after a night of drinking. Witnesses soon began flooding 911 with calls. A red Camaro was spotted tearing north in the southbound lanes of the 57 freeway, flying at more than 100 miles per hour. Minutes later, it was seen again, this time on the 60 freeway, heading east in the westbound lanes. One caller warned desperately, Something terrible is about to happen, and they were right. Moments later, Olivia's Camaro slammed head-on into a red Ford Explorer. The impact was catastrophic. Both vehicles were obliterated in an instant. Inside the Explorer was a family of four: 47-year-old Gregorio Mejia Martinez, his wife, 42-year-old Leticia Ibarra, their 20-year-old daughter, Jessica Jasmine, and Jessica's grandmother, 80-year-old Esther Delgado. None of them survived. In Olivia's car, her sister, 24-year-old Maya Louise, and her friend, 21-year-old Kristen Melissa Young, were killed instantly as well. Olivia was the only one left alive. Nearby, another driver, 57-year-old Joel Cortez, was caught in the chain of destruction. His Ford Freestyle was struck, forcing him into the divider. Dazed and bleeding, he watched the horror unfold. Wreckage scattered across the freeway, bodies lifeless on the asphalt. Believing he wouldn't survive, he called his children to say goodbye. By some miracle, he did. Olivia, broken and battered, was pulled from the Camaro and rushed to the hospital. As word spread, shock rippled across California. How could a young mother, less than 2 weeks after giving birth, be behind the wheel that night? Investigators quickly uncovered the truth. Her blood alcohol level was 0.15%, nearly twice the legal limit. A 24-ounce beer can was still in the wreckage. Surveillance footage showed her drinking earlier at a Fullerton bar, and this wasn't her first brush with disaster. At 17, she had already been convicted of DUI after crashing into a pole. Her license had been suspended more than once. In fact, just days before this crash, it had been reinstated, with warnings that another violation could lead to murder charges. Those warnings came true. Olivia was charged with 6 counts of second-degree murder. Court delays stretched the pain for years. Finally, in May 2018, she stood before the judge and pleaded no contest. Even Olivia's own mother spoke, describing her daughter as someone who once cared deeply for others, now reduced to raising her infant son through prison visits. Olivia herself often asked the same haunting question: why did I survive? But apologies weren't enough. The judge rejected any plea for leniency, sentencing her to 30 years to life, 5 years for each life lost. She won't be eligible for parole for 25 years. The prosecutor reminded the court that while Olivia spoke of remorse, her defense at times tried to shift blame. Outside, Kristen Young's mother said bluntly, she knew she was over the limit. She just didn't think anything would happen.
A head-on crash today in South Texas left 8 people dead. Officials say police were chasing a suspected human smuggler when the driver crashed into an SUV, killing 2 people from Georgia.
The morning of 2023 on U.S. Highway 57 near Batesville, Texas, began like any other. Jose Lerma, 67, and his wife Isabel, 65, were making their way south in their Chevrolet Equinox. They had been married nearly half a century, 49 years together, and were likely headed to Mexico for a visit. Isabel had even posted a cheerful birthday message to a friend less than an hour earlier. 2 people in love, seasoned by life, doing something as simple as driving down a rural highway. They had no idea their journey was about to end. At that same time, a white 2009 Honda Civic barreled down the road. Behind the wheel was a 21-year-old man from Houston. His car was crammed with 5 passengers, later identified as Honduran citizens, believed to be in the U.S. without legal documents. Law enforcement would confirm later. This was a smuggling run. When a Zavala County deputy tried to stop the Honda, the driver refused. He hit the gas instead, sparking yet another high-speed chase in southern Texas, a region where these pursuits have become frighteningly common. Witnesses recalled the Honda swerving recklessly, desperate to outrun the flashing lights behind it. And then came the moment of decision. The driver swung out, trying to overtake an 18-wheeler in a no-passing zone. Maybe he thought he could make it. Maybe he was panicked, blind to anything beyond escape. But coming from the other direction was the Equinox, Jose and Isabel inside. The impact was catastrophic. Both cars collided head-on, the sound echoing across the highway like an explosion. The Equinox burst into flames almost instantly, trapping the couple inside. Both died there, their lives cut short in an inferno of twisted steel and fire. The driver and all 5 passengers were killed on impact. In the span of seconds, 8 people were gone. Photos from the scene later showed nothing but devastation. The Equinox reduced to a charred shell, the Civic torn apart like paper. Texas DPS officials confirmed what many already feared. This was another smuggling attempt gone horribly wrong. But for the Lerma family back in Georgia, those words meant nothing compared to the reality. Their son, Jairo, broke the news online. His grief raw, his words heavy. He created a fundraiser to bring his parents home for burial. He wrote that their loss had left their hearts and souls shattered. By that Friday, over $7,000 had poured in, along with hundreds of messages of support. The couple had been just 1 month shy of celebrating their 49th wedding anniversary. The tragedy drew national attention. It was the deadliest migrant-related vehicle crash in the U.S. since 2021, when 13 people died in California. In Texas alone, more than 500 high-speed pursuits were reported in El Paso that year, many reaching speeds over 100 miles per hour. The numbers keep climbing. The American Civil Liberties Union of Texas has tracked over 100 deaths linked to Border Patrol chases since 2010, with a sharp rise in recent years. Critics argue the pursuits are too dangerous, turning highways into killing fields. Law enforcement counters that smugglers cannot simply be allowed to vanish into the night. Even new pursuit policies, urging officers to weigh public safety before chasing, can't undo the split-second decisions of a driver who refuses to stop.
I work in West Seattle, and every time I cross that bridge, I have to think about how my brother and his best friend were killed because they were trying to celebrate his birthday.
Devastating words from loved ones who will never fully heal.
The West Seattle Bridge, for most drivers, it was just another ordinary commute. But for two best friends, Riley Denard and Ka Thuk, it was the last road they would ever take. They were only 18, just beginning their lives, returning home after celebrating Riley's birthday. A silver sedan appeared in the wrong lane, weaving dangerously as it sped closer and closer. Behind the wheel was 37-year-old Delfino Lopez Morales. He wasn't lost. He wasn't confused, he was drunk. His blood alcohol content nearly doubled the legal limit at 0.14 with THC in his system. Witnesses had already called 911. Some even tried to flag him down, but nothing stopped him. Nothing slowed him. And in that instant, the headlights bore down on Riley and Ka like a nightmare coming to life. The crash was devastating. Lopez Morales slammed into their car at nearly 100 miles per hour. The sound of shattering glass and twisting steel echoed across the bridge. First responders later said it looked like the wreckage of an explosion, barely recognizable as two cars. Riley, who loved photography and music, who carried her camera everywhere to capture the beauty in small moments, gone. Kalia, who dreamed of becoming a nurse, the first in her family to attend college, gone. Two young lives erased in the blink of an eye. As investigators pieced the story together, the truth was even more infuriating. Lopez Morales had no valid driver's license. He was impaired by alcohol and drugs. He was speeding at highway levels in the wrong lane, and yet somehow he had still been able to get behind the wheel. This wasn't a chance. This wasn't bad luck. This was reckless inevitability. For more than a year, the case dragged through court. Finally, in September 2024, Lopez Morales pled guilty to 2 counts of vehicular homicide and 1 count of reckless driving. When sentencing came in November, the courtroom was overflowing. Friends, classmates, neighbors, entire rooms were filled with people mourning 2 teenagers who should have had their whole lives ahead of them. Riley's family spoke of her laughter, her kindness, the way she gave her time to everyone around her. Kalia's parents broke down as they described how their daughter would never wear her college sweatshirt, never cross a graduation stage. These weren't just stories. They were futures ripped away, dreams that would never unfold. And then came the defense. Lopez Morales' attorney argued he suffered from cerebral palsy, suggesting leniency. But to the families, to the community, it sounded like another insult. If he struggled with movement, if he mixed that with alcohol and drugs, how was he ever trusted to drive at all? Judge Angela Craik addressed the packed courtroom. She acknowledged that one reckless choice doesn't define a person, but that night, his choice had destroyed lives and futures. Then she handed down the maximum penalty allowed under Washington law. 148 months, just over 12 years in prison, followed by 18 months of community custody. 12 years. That was all. A man who killed 2 girls at nearly 100 miles an hour, drunk, high, and going the wrong way, could be free before his 50th birthday. For the families, it was unbearable. The sentence felt like a second wound. Justice too light for a loss too heavy. Riley and Kalia's story is not just about a crash. It's about a system that allowed a man like this to keep driving until tragedy was unavoidable. It's about how even the maximum punishment can never come close to the real sentence, the one their families now carry forever. Empty birthdays, graduations that will never come, a lifetime of milestones stolen before they even began. 2 teenagers went out to celebrate life. Instead, they became another chapter in America's endless book of DUI tragedies. And for those who loved them, the punishment will never be measured in years. It will be measured in everything Riley and Kalia should have lived for: but never will.
Taylor Pollock from the First Alert Desk, and I've just confirmed that a woman has died after crashing a car in the same location her boyfriend crashed and died in just days earlier.
It was the kind of town where nothing ever really happened. Riverside, Alabama, population just over 2,000, sat quietly about 40 minutes outside Birmingham. But that peace shattered in the early hours of June 20th, 2024. Around 1:30 a.m., a call came in. A car had slammed into Riverside Baptist Church, the oldest building in town. Flames engulfed it fast. Fire crews rushed in from Riverside and nearby Pell City, but the fire was already out of control. Inside the wrecked vehicle was 19-year-old Anthony Banks, Jr. He had just turned 1917 days earlier. Police said he'd lost control on a sharp curve near the church. His car left the road, hit the building, and sparked the fire that destroyed both the church and him. By morning, all that remained was scorched brick and ash, a symbol of faith gone, and a young man remembered by friends as joyful, gone too soon. His mother posted online, searching for help with funeral costs. His life hadn't even started before he was tragically taken, she wrote. But the heartbreak wasn't over. 3 days later, almost the same time of night, it happened again. At 12:53 a.m. on Sunday, June 23rd, Riverside police were in pursuit of a 2019 BMW X5 taken without permission. It tore through town, straight toward the spot where Anthony had crashed. The car lost control, slammed into a brick wall near the ruins of the church, and burst into flames. Inside was 19-year-old Jennifer Hell Arellano Maldonado, Anthony's girlfriend. She wasn't wearing a seatbelt. She didn't make it out. The crash intensified the destruction at the church site. Firefighters battled flames for the second time in days. 2 teens in love, both gone, 3 days apart, at the same place, nearly the same time. State Trooper Brandon Bailey confirmed Jennifer had been fleeing police. The car was reported missing by a family member. She was alone. No one knows what was going through her mind. Investigators haven't ruled anything out. The curve where both crashes happened is now etched with tragedy. Riverside Baptist Church became the backdrop for 2 devastating endings. Mayor Rusty Jessup said the church would be rebuilt. A local man said, "I hope they make it as nice as it was." But no matter how beautiful it becomes, the town will never forget. Anthony's mother continues posting tributes. Her GoFundMe had raised a few $100s by midweek. As I write this, tears flow uncontrollably, praying for this all to be some nightmare we will all wake from soon. 2 teenagers, in love, gone, one after the other, as if pulled by something unseen, toward the same place, the same fate, and now there's a curve in Riverside no one will ever look at the same way again.
49 arriving. We got to block the intersection. Anyone inside the vehicle?
It was the early hours of November 2nd, 2021 in Las Vegas. Most of the strip had gone to sleep, except for the neon glow, still flickering, still breathing. Somewhere off Rainbow Boulevard, 23-year-old Tina Tintor was on her way home. She had just dropped off a friend. Her dog, Max, had gone for a walk with her earlier that night, something Tina often did. It was a part of her calm routine, a way to wind down from her day. Tina was driving her Toyota RAV4, just minutes from the house she shared with her family. Speeding down the same boulevard was a black Chevrolet Corvette Stingray. Behind the wheel, Henry Ruggs III. At 22, he was a rising star in the NFL, known for his speed on the field. But on this night, that speed became something else entirely. According to police, Ruggs was flying down the road at 156 miles per hour. His blood alcohol level was more than twice the legal limit. He had been drinking at a golf driving range at the MGM Grand just before, laughing, playing, taking shots. Videos captured it all. And then, just past 3:40 a.m., the impossible happened in a flash. His Corvette slammed into the back of Tina's SUV. It burst into flames. Trapped inside were Tina and Max. Witnesses would later recall hearing screaming. Tina never made it out. She had come so far in her life. Born in Croatia in 1998, her family fled during the Balkan conflict. They escaped bombings, raids, violence, eventually making their way to Serbia, only to face more instability. In 2001, her mother brought Tina and her brother to America as refugees. They landed in Las Vegas hoping for a second chance. Tina made the most of it. She worked hard. She smiled often. She dreamed of becoming a computer programmer. She had a job with an insurance company working remotely. She was finally about to receive her U.S. citizenship. That dream was days away, but in a matter of seconds, it was gone. Henry Ruggs survived the crash. So did his girlfriend, Kiara, who had been in the passenger seat. When Ruggs appeared in court, he wore a neck brace. He faced felony charges: DUI resulting in death, reckless driving, firearm possession. If convicted, he could serve up to 46 years in prison. He was released on $150,000 bail and confined to his $1.1 million home, fitted with alcohol monitoring devices. His passport was taken. He was no longer allowed to drive. Tina's uncle, Predrag Kamazek, said what no family should have to say. "We escaped all that over there. War and bombing. We come here, and this happens." Her brother, Georgia, struggled to speak of the night. He said she had been doing what she always did, spending time with Max, seeing friends, laughing. The community grieved. They painted a mural near the crash site. Her friends spoke of the future plans they'd made. Tina wanted to visit Serbia again. She had talked about it the night she died. She was excited, hopeful. Her friend Bana described her as steady, loyal. A year after the crash, Tina's family released a quiet, heartbroken statement. "We are beyond devastated. We hope justice will be served." But the legal process dragged on. Ruggs's attorneys argued that emergency crews were too slow, that maybe, just maybe, Tina could have survived. But Clark County officials were blunt. No one could have survived what happened inside that car, not with that fire, not with those flames.
The accident was at a well-known danger spot. In the French countryside, there are more and more big vehicles, too often traveling at speed.
It was October 23rd, 2015 in southwestern France. A group of retirees from the tiny village of Petit-Palais-et-Cournon had set off on what was meant to be a peaceful day trip. These were neighbors, friends, couples who had shared countless outings together, now packed onto a bus, ready to enjoy the golden vineyards near Saint-Emilion. The bus glided along a narrow forested road. Coming from the opposite direction, a logging truck appeared, navigating the same tight bend. At the wheel was 30-year-old Cyril Alexandre, his 3-year-old son sitting beside him. The truck was heavy. Its load was a dangerous mix of timber and a large external tank of gasoline for chainsaws. As the truck rounded the bend, something went wrong. Maybe the weight shifted. Maybe the curve was too sharp. Cyril lost control. In a terrifying instant, the truck jackknifed across the road, skidding straight into the path of the bus. The impact was deafening. Metal crushed against metal. The truck's fuel tank burst, spilling gasoline that raced across the pavement, right under the bus. Sparks flew, and then flames. The fire erupted so fast it was like an explosion. Within seconds, both vehicles were engulfed. Plastic fittings inside the bus melted. Smoke thickened the air, and the searing heat trapped passengers where they sat. Out of 50 souls on that bus, only 8 would make it out alive. Somehow, the bus driver managed to react in those crucial moments. Seeing the disaster unfold, he opened the emergency exits before the inferno consumed everything. It was enough to save a few lives, but for most it was too late. Jean-Claude Leonard, 73, was among the lucky few. He and his wife, Josette, had just fastened their seatbelts when the crash came. The fire spread, he said, like lightning. Desperate, he unbuckled them both and dragged Josette toward a fire exit. They tumbled out into the chaos, only to see friends and neighbors trapped inside, screaming for help. Without thinking, Jean-Claude ran back, flames licking at his clothes. He and another driver pulled 2 passengers from the wreckage before the fire's fury forced them back. The bus tires exploded. Windows shattered. The entire vehicle became a blazing tomb. When it was over, 41 people lay dead inside the bus. Many never even had a chance to stand. Emergency hammers were there, but panic, smoke, and the speed of the fire made them useless. Some passengers couldn't reach them. Some didn't know they were there. In the end, the fire was so ferocious that both the bus and the truck were reduced to blackened skeletons. Smoke from the wreck could be seen for miles. Cyril Alexandre and his little boy never made it out of the truck. In total, 43 lives were lost that morning, marking France's deadliest road disaster in over 3 decades. The scene that followed was haunting. Firefighters, helicopters, emergency crews, all arrived to a landscape of devastation. Families waited for news that would break their hearts. Identifying the victims took weeks. The fire had been that cruel.
This was sentencing day for the woman accused of killing her sister and 5 other people in a wrong-way drunk driving crash.
It was the early morning of February 9th, 2014, in Diamond Bar, California. 21-year-old Olivia Carolee Culbreth, a young mother from Fontana, had given birth just 11 days earlier. But instead of being home with her newborn, she made a choice that would end in one of the most devastating wrong-way crashes California had ever seen. At around 4:40 a.m., Olivia climbed into a red Chevrolet Camaro after a night of drinking. Witnesses soon began flooding 911 with calls. A red Camaro was spotted tearing north in the southbound lanes of the 57 freeway, flying at more than 100 miles per hour. Minutes later, it was seen again, this time on the 60 freeway, heading east in the westbound lanes. One caller warned desperately, "Something terrible is about to happen," and they were right. Moments later, Olivia's Camaro slammed head-on into a red Ford Explorer. The impact was catastrophic. Both vehicles were obliterated in an instant. Inside the Explorer was a family of four: 47-year-old Gregorio Mejia Martinez, his wife, 42-year-old Leticia Ibarra, their 20-year-old daughter, Jessica Jasmine, and Jessica's grandmother, 80-year-old Esther Delgado. None of them survived. In Olivia's car, her sister, 24-year-old Maya Louise, and her friend, 21-year-old Kristen Melissa Young, were killed instantly as well. Olivia was the only one left alive. Nearby, another driver, 57-year-old Joel Cortez, was caught in the chain of destruction. His Ford Freestyle was struck, forcing him into the divider. Dazed and bleeding, he watched the horror unfold. Wreckage scattered across the freeway, bodies lifeless on the asphalt. Believing he wouldn't survive, he called his children to say goodbye. By some miracle, he did. Olivia, broken and battered, was pulled from the Camaro and rushed to the hospital. As word spread, shock rippled across California. How could a young mother, less than 2 weeks after giving birth, be behind the wheel that night? Investigators quickly uncovered the truth. Her blood alcohol level was 0.15%, nearly twice the legal limit. A 24-ounce beer can was still in the wreckage. Surveillance footage showed her drinking earlier at a Fullerton bar, and this wasn't her first brush with disaster. At 17, she had already been convicted of DUI after crashing into a pole. Her license had been suspended more than once. In fact, just days before this crash, it had been reinstated, with warnings that another violation could lead to murder charges. Those warnings came true. Olivia was charged with 6 counts of second-degree murder. Court delays stretched the pain for years. Finally, in May 2018, she stood before the judge and pleaded no contest. Even Olivia's own mother spoke, describing her daughter as someone who once cared deeply for others, now reduced to raising her infant son through prison visits. Olivia herself often asked the same haunting question, "Why did I survive?" But apologies weren't enough. The judge rejected any plea for leniency, sentencing her to 30 years to life, 5 years for each life lost. She won't be eligible for parole for 25 years. The prosecutor reminded the court that while Olivia spoke of remorse, her defense at times tried to shift blame. Outside, Kristen Young's mother said bluntly, she knew she was over the limit. She just didn't think anything would happen.
It all happened so quickly. 1 minute this bus was carrying a tired but happy group of teens who had spent the day at Kings Island. The next minute, there were headlights in the bus's path, a crash, a fire, and a frantic struggle against death.
It was May 14th, 1988. A group of children and adults from the First Assembly of God Church in Radcliffe, Kentucky, was supposed to be just that. They had spent the day at Kings Island Amusement Park. Laughter echoed on the way there, and by nightfall, they were tired but happy. 63 kids, ages 10 to 18, and 4 adult chaperones boarded their church bus for the ride home. They didn't know it, but they were about to be part of one of the deadliest drunk driving tragedies in American history. Around 10:30 p.m., as the bus made its way down Interstate 71 in Carroll County, a pickup truck appeared, coming from the wrong direction. Behind the wheel was 34-year-old Larry Mahoney. He was drunk, not just a little. His blood alcohol level was 0.24%, more than twice the legal limit, and in a few seconds, everything unraveled. The truck hit the bus head-on. The force of the crash alone was devastating, but the nightmare didn't end there. The impact ruptured the bus's fuel tank, which was located near the front steps, an overlooked design flaw that became catastrophic in that moment. Flames exploded through the vehicle. The fire moved faster than most could react. Narrow aisles, no rear emergency door, a single side exit. Kids pushed and screamed and tried to climb over seats, but the smoke was thick and blinding, the heat suffocating. By the time rescuers got the fire under control, 27 lives were gone. 24 were children. Survivors were pulled from the burning wreckage. Some burned, some barely breathing. One of the victims was 10-year-old Patty Nunnally. Her mother, Carolyn, was home when the phone rang. It wasn't a rescue call. It was a request for Patty's dental records. Later, Carolyn learned her daughter hadn't burned to death. She'd inhaled toxic fumes before the fire took her, a detail no mother should have to carry. Mahoney was arrested at the scene, reeking of alcohol, his eyes dazed. He was charged and convicted of manslaughter and wanton endangerment. 16 years behind bars, but he didn't serve all of it. Good behavior shaved off the time. He was released in under 10 years. Since then, he hasn't spoken publicly. Not once. No apology, no explanation, just silence. But the silence didn't reach the families. In Fort Knox, in Radcliffe, grief echoed through every home. Some parents buried their children together. Some never saw their kids' faces again. The pain was enormous and it didn't fade, but from the ashes, some found purpose. Carolyn Nunnally, Patty's mother, turned her loss into a mission. She joined Mothers Against Drunk Driving, MADD, and eventually became the organization's national president. She lobbied for stricter laws, better enforcement, and, most of all, safer vehicles. Her push led to tangible change. Buses were redesigned with fire-resistant seats, emergency exits were added, fuel tanks moved. A generation of kids would be safer because of the ones who didn't come home. But not every heartbreak could be healed with policy. Janet KDA Hancock lost her husband Chuck that night. He had been standing near the front of the bus and couldn't escape. For years, she carried that loss, until it returned. In 2010, her son Charlie, just 9 years old at the time of the 1988 crash, was killed by another drunk driver. 2 decades apart, same grief, same pain. A circle that never should have existed. Quentin Higgins was 15 when it happened. He'd been sitting near the front of the bus, burned, scarred, but alive. The crash changed him forever. Years later, he became a school bus driver, not because he forgot, but because he remembered. He even bought a bus nearly identical to the one from that night. Quentin drives that bus to schools, sharing the story, showing young people what one drunk decision can destroy. Every day when I drive, he says, I think of those kids, my friends who didn't make it. I speak for them because they can't. And he's right. They can't. But their stories do. As for Larry Mahoney, the man who started it all, he walks free, quietly, unseen. But those families live with the wreckage he left behind every single day. They look at old photographs and wonder what could have been. The Carrollton bus crash didn't just take lives. It changed them. It rewrote laws. It haunted communities. It forced America to confront a truth it still struggles with. Impaired driving isn't just reckless, it's deadly. And when it kills, it leaves behind more than victims. It was a Sunday night in March 2019 in Odessa, Ukraine. 33-year-old Victoria Kravchenko was sitting in the passenger seat of a BMW X6 next to 22-year-old Shamil Gav as the car raced through the streets. Witnesses said they were speeding alongside a Porsche, engines roaring, chasing adrenaline. What neither of them knew was that within minutes this ride would end in flames. Victoria wasn't just anyone. She was a mother of 2, a daughter and a businesswoman. She carried with her a story that connected the quiet streets of Odessa to the glamour of Hollywood. Her father, Valery Kravchenko, was once stunned by a revelation that linked their family tree to none other than Sylvester Stallone. It began decades earlier when Stallone's mother, Jackie, began digging into her family's roots in the Soviet Union. With help from Mikhail Gorbachev himself, the KGB traced her grandmother's line back to Odessa. The trail led straight to Valery's family, proving that the Kravchenkos and Stallones were distant cousins. Jackie flew to Odessa, where she met Valery face to face. He thought it was a joke, until she looked him in the eye and said, "Hello, Valery, how are you? It looks like you are the only living relation of our family." Back then, Valery was breaking barriers, opening the first privately owned gas station in the Soviet Union. He later introduced Jackie to his daughter, Victoria. She was young, full of energy, and had no idea how strange and extraordinary that meeting really was. Years later, Victoria recalled how surreal it felt to discover a bloodline connecting her to one of Hollywood's biggest icons. She laughed about how nobody believed her at first, until she explained how Jackie Stallone had sat with her like a girlfriend, offering travel tips, cracking jokes, and radiating energy even at her age. She remembered thinking her father and Sylvester shared the same piercing eyes. By 2019, Victoria had built a life of her own. She was a successful businesswoman, working in her father's companies, raising her children, and carrying herself with the quiet confidence of someone proud of her roots. But that March night, all of it ended in seconds. As the BMW tore through the streets, it slammed into a parked Hyundai Sonata. The impact sent the car spinning, metal screaming as it lost control. Then came the moment no one could take back. The BMW smashed into a utility pole carrying high-voltage wires. In an instant, the night lit up with fire. The car exploded. Flames swallowed the vehicle, and Victoria and Shamil were trapped inside. There was no escape. By the time emergency crews arrived, the scene was already beyond saving. All that was left was a blazing wreck, the smell of smoke heavy in the air, and 2 lives cut short. Security cameras captured the exact moment the car spun out of control, a few seconds that replayed over and over as investigators reviewed the footage. A thrill ride turned to silence. Tragedy struck the gymnastics world on September 13, 2025, when 19-year-old Naufal Takdir Albari, one of Indonesia's brightest rising stars, was training in Penza, Russia. The young athlete, preparing for his country's upcoming World Championships, was attempting a high bar routine, a skill meant to dazzle, to push the limits of human strength and precision. But in a heartbeat, everything changed. Albari fell awkwardly into a foam pit, the result of what was described as a severe neck injury. The crowd of spectators may have been absent, but the echo of that moment would resonate across continents. Rushed to Giza Karen Hospital, Albari spent 12 agonizing days in intensive care. Hope lingered in the hearts of his coaches, teammates, and family. But despite the best efforts of doctors, he passed away on September 25th. Indonesia lost not just a talented gymnast, but a young man whose dreams were intertwined with the nation's pride, a hopeful contender for the 2028 Olympics, whose life was abruptly cut short. The news rippled through the gymnastics community like a shockwave. Ita Yuliati, president of the Indonesian Gymnastics Federation, spoke with heartbreak. Albari was a talented young athlete and a good person. Indonesian gymnastics has lost one of the nation's finest sons. This is a deep blow and sorrow for us. May the family be given strength. Across borders, the Russian Gymnastics Federation confirmed it was investigating the incident. Vasily Titov, the federation's vice president, offered condolences and assistance with repatriating Albari's body, adding, "Unfortunately, the athlete was not prepared to perform such a complex element." The timing of the tragedy made it even more poignant, with the 2025 Artistic Gymnastics World Championships set to take place in Jakarta just a month later. Albari's absence left a void that could not be filled. He had been expected to compete for medals at SEA Games 33 and had the potential to represent Indonesia on the Olympic stage. His passing, CNN Indonesia reported, was a heavy blow to the country's gymnastics scene. And for many, it served as a chilling reminder of just how fragile life can be, even for the strongest and most disciplined athletes. Albari's accident evokes memories of past gymnastics tragedies, from Julissa Gomez, who was paralyzed after a vault and later died from complications, to Elena Mukina, the Soviet star whose life was claimed by the Thomas Salto in 1980. For Albari, the pursuit of excellence ended in heartbreak, leaving a nation and a sport mourning the loss of a promising life taken too soon. In the quiet aftermath of his passing, fans, fellow athletes, and young gymnasts around the world are left to reflect. Even amid the beauty, precision, and artistry of gymnastics, danger always lurks, a single moment capable of shattering dreams forever.
A 29-year-old man has been charged with 20 offences, including manslaughter and high-range drink driving, after 4 children were killed in Sydney.
It was February 1st, 2020, in Oatlands, a quiet suburb of Western Sydney. For the Abdallah and Sakra families, it was just another Saturday. 7 children walked together toward a local shop, laughing, planning to buy ice cream. Among them were siblings Anthony, Angelina, and Sienna Abdallah, their cousin Veronique Sakr, and 3 friends. But within seconds, everything turned into a nightmare. Behind the wheel of a blue Mitsubishi 4WD was 30-year-old Samuel William Davidson. He had been drinking since morning, beer, rum, vodka cruisers, mixing it with drugs like MDMA. Witnesses later remembered him shirtless, laughing, making obscene gestures as he sped recklessly through Sydney's suburbs. He ran red lights, forced drivers off the road, swerved between lanes as if nothing could stop him. By the time he reached Beddington Road, his car was a missile. In a 50 kilometers per h zone, he pushed 133. At impact, he was still flying at 111. The vehicle mounted the curb and plowed straight into the group of children. The force scattered bodies across 17 meters, some dragged against a fence. 4 were killed instantly. Anthony, 13, Angelina, 12, Sienna, just 8 years old, and their cousin Veronique, 11. 3 others were left broken, one slipping into a coma for weeks. Davidson stepped out of the wreck unharmed. Shocked witnesses heard him mutter, "What have I done? I'm going to jail." The scene drew nearly 200 people. Grief was so raw, so overwhelming, police had to call in the riot squad to hold the crowd back. Cameras captured Davidson shirtless, handcuffed, being dragged away. And the next morning, when microphones crowded outside the Abdallah home, the world expected silence. Instead, Danny Abdallah stood there, broken but unshaken, describing each of his children. Anthony, a young basketballer dreaming of honoring Kobe Bryant. Angelina, his little helper. Sienna, the actress of the family, bursting with life. Through tears, he said, "These kids were just walking innocently. And now I've lost 3 of them." But what stunned everyone was his wife Layla's words. Through unimaginable grief, she said she did not hate Davidson. That choice, to forgive, stopped the nation cold. While Davidson's parents insisted their son was a good man who lost his way, the Abdallahs chose to respond not with rage, but mercy. In April 2021, Davidson pleaded guilty to 9 charges, including 4 counts of manslaughter. He was sentenced to 28 years, later reduced to 20. In prison, he turned to faith, reading the Bible, clinging to the family's forgiveness as his only lifeline. He eventually met Danny Abdallah face to face. They prayed together. Danny told him about each child. When asked if Davidson should stay in prison, Danny's response was haunting. "If it were up to me, I'd bring him out tomorrow. Justice is to have my kids back." The crash site became a shrine. Thousands left flowers, candles, toys, and photos. Courtrooms overflowed with grief-stricken statements. Veronique's mother said, "No court or sentence can ever compensate for what we've lost." And yet, the Abdallah's message never changed. Through unbearable pain, they spoke of forgiveness, of choosing love over hate. Danny's words echoed across the country. There are no winners in this. All we can do is try to find joy in the middle of pain.
An Adelaide man who hit and killed a 15-year-old girl with his Lamborghini has received a suspended jail sentence of 4 months and 27 days.
It was just before 10 p.m. on June 22, 2019, in Glengowrie, a quiet suburb in Adelaide, South Australia. The streets were still. A chill lingered in the winter air. 15-year-old Sophia Naismith was walking with her best friend, Jordan Callick, down Morfett Road. They passed storefronts, restaurants glowing softly in the dark. It was a regular evening, a simple walk. Nothing felt out of place. Then, screeching tires, a flash of white, metal against concrete, glass shattering. In an instant, everything changed. A white Lamborghini Huracan had veered off the road. It launched over the curb and struck the girls with devastating force before slamming into the House of Tea and Chinese restaurant. The driver was 37-year-old Alexander Campbell. He'd only owned the car for 4 months. It was worth $330,000 and had custom plates that read one word, Psycho. That night, he was driving it in sport mode, a setting that disabled key safety systems, including electronic stability control. More power, less control. Sophia never stood a chance. She died at the scene. Jordan, badly injured, was rushed to Flinders Medical Center. From her hospital bed, she posted a photo and a heartbreaking tribute to her best friend. "You will be forever loved and never forgotten." The news tore through Adelaide like wildfire. Sophia wasn't just another name in the headlines. She was kind, driven, vibrant, a student at Brighton Secondary, a volleyball star selected to represent South Australia at Nationals in just a few weeks. Her parents, Pia and Luke, had watched her grow into someone full of promise. And just like that, gone. Thousands came to her memorial. Flowers piled up on Morfett Road. Her school opened grief support. The whole city felt it. The randomness, the injustice, the unimaginable loss. Then came the trial. Prosecutors argued Campbell knew exactly what he was doing. He had disabled the car's safeguards. He knew how cold the roads were. They believed he'd lost control of the Lamborghini earlier that night. The charge, causing death by dangerous driving. But 3 years later, a judge found him not guilty of that charge. Said the prosecution couldn't prove, beyond a reasonable doubt, that he had accelerated dangerously. Instead, he was convicted of a lesser offense, aggravated driving without due care. The sentence? No prison time. Just a suspended term, 4 months and 27 days. a bit of community service, a good behavior bond. His license was suspended, but much of that time had already passed while he awaited trial. Outside court, Sophia's parents stood in disbelief. Her mother called the sentence sickening. Her father vowed to turn their grief into action. If the system couldn't deliver justice for their daughter, then maybe they could change the system itself. And they did. Over the next few years, Sophia's name sparked a movement. Sophia's Law was introduced in South Australia. New penalties, up to $5,000, for disabling safety features in high-powered vehicles. A new offense was created, causing death or harm through careless driving, now punishable by up to 7 years in prison. Police were given more authority to immediately suspend licenses, and soon, ultra-high-powered cars would require a special license to operate. Sophia's legacy reached beyond legislation. Volleyball SA created the Sophia Naismith SA Spirit Award, honoring young athletes who embody compassion, teamwork, and determination, everything Sophia was known for. In 2023, the first award went to Zephyr Bruce, a player who kept showing up for her team even while recovering from an injury. Sophia's parents personally handed her the award. Sophia didn't die behind the wheel. She didn't take risks or chase danger. She was simply walking with a friend, under streetlights on a quiet night. But a man in a powerful machine made a series of reckless decisions, and the justice system, for all its rules and procedures, couldn't quite catch up to the loss he'd left behind.
Heartbreak tonight in Victorville after the tragic death of a San Bernardino County Sheriff's deputy killed in the line of duty.
The young father, husband, and 6-year veteran of the department was killed in a violent crash during the pursuit of a...
It was the morning of March 17th, 2025, in Victorville, California. For most, it was an ordinary Tuesday. But for Deputy Hector Quist Jr., 36 years old, it was supposed to be a day off. Instead, he had picked up an overtime shift, the kind of sacrifice he was known for. He had been with the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department for 6 years, and though he was dedicated to the job, those who knew him said his greatest devotion was to his wife and 2 children. He was more than a deputy. He was a brother, a son, a husband, a father, and once a football coach who inspired kids long before he ever put on a badge. Just before 11 a.m., deputies at the Victorville station spotted a stolen car near Mojave Drive and Amorosa Road. Behind the wheel was 22-year-old Ryan Dwayne Turner Jr., a man with a long history of trouble. Turner was no stranger to police. He'd been caught stealing cars before, arrested for running from law enforcement, and had already caused a crash during a pursuit the year before. He should have still been behind bars, serving a sentence for that crime. But because of early release laws, he was out, free to run again, and run he did. When deputies tried to stop him, Turner hit the gas, the stolen car screaming past traffic lights, swerving recklessly, hitting speeds of over 100 miles per hour. What followed was chaos, the kind of chase that tears through a city like a hurricane, leaving everyone else at its mercy. Deputy Quiz joined the pursuit, closing in as the chase cut through Victorville's intersections. But in a matter of seconds, everything changed. Turner's desperate flight had set the stage for tragedy. As Deputy Quiz pushed forward, his patrol SUV collided with a sedan driven by 23-year-old Marceline Demian, who had been making a left turn with the green light. The impact sent Quiz's vehicle careening into a light pole with such force it snapped in half. The crash tore through the street, knocking out power to nearby homes, the sound echoing like a bomb blast. First responders swarmed the scene, but the damage was done. Deputy Quiz's injuries were catastrophic. Despite desperate efforts, he died there on the road, a father and husband lost in the line of duty. Demian survived, though badly hurt. Through tears, she later explained she never saw him coming, that his sirens weren't on. If I had seen him, I would have stopped. Meanwhile, Turner kept going. He ditched the stolen car near Zuri Lane, fleeing on foot. Even in handcuffs, deputies said he tried to run again. Prosecutors revealed he had been intoxicated that morning. His charges mounted: evading police, vehicle theft, and now, second-degree homicide. The weight of the loss fell hard on Victorville and far beyond. Deputy Quiz wasn't just a badge number. He was a Rialto native, a Carter High School graduate, a man who once coached football at his alma mater and later played in the National Public Safety Football League. His teammates remembered him as competitive, but it was his children who knew the truest version of him. A father who loved them more than anything in the world. The community's grief spilled into the streets. When his body was escorted down Interstate 15, firefighters and first responders lined overpasses in salute, helicopters hovering above in a solemn tribute. The next day, candles and flowers piled high at the crash site, glowing reminders that his life mattered. His sister Dominique's voice broke as she said, "My brother was a good man. It wasn't in vain." His uncle Pedro Rivera added, "Putting on that uniform made him proud every day." On April 17th, nearly 3,000 people filled the Ontario Convention Centre for his funeral. His children's voices, recorded ahead of time, played for the crowd. "I love you, Daddy. You are my hero, and I'm going to miss you." There wasn't a dry eye in the room. The service ended with a rifle salute, a flyover, and the haunting sound of taps. It was a quiet spring night in May 2017, the kind where the Michigan countryside feels timeless, fields stretching wide, the roads nearly empty, and silence settling over Ocola Township. But at the intersection of M59 and Argentine Road, that silence was shattered in the most violent way possible. In seconds, one man's selfish decision turned an ordinary evening into one of the deadliest DUI crashes Michigan has ever seen. The driver was 22-year-old Matthew Carrier. He had no valid license, yet he climbed into his car after drinking heavily. His blood alcohol level later measured at 0.15-, nearly twice the legal limit. Instead of handing over his keys, he floored the accelerator, tearing through the township at almost 100 miles per hour. Witnesses saw his headlights streaking like a ghost through the night. He reached the stop sign at M59, but he never slowed down. No brake lights, no hesitation, just pure, reckless momentum. At that very moment, another vehicle was crossing the intersection. Inside were people simply trying to get home. They had no warning, no chance to react. Carrier's car slammed into them with catastrophic force, ripping their vehicle apart and scattering debris across hundreds of feet of roadway. By the time first responders arrived, the scene was a nightmare. 5 people dead, 2 more badly injured, lives erased in the blink of an eye. Among the dead was Candace Dunn, just 35 years old, who hours earlier had stood proudly on a stage accepting Michigan's award for Probation Agent of the Year. Beside her, her mother, 69-year-old Linda Hurley, and Linda's longtime boyfriend, 73-year-old Jerome Tortomasi. Also gone were 20-year-old Justin Henderson, with his entire life ahead of him, and 24-year-old Preston Wetzel, who never made it back home that night. In a single instant, one family line was wiped out, and a community was left reeling. When Matthew Carrier finally faced trial, prosecutors laid out the facts like cold steel. Drunk, nearly double the limit, no license, flying 100 miles per hour through a 55 zone, and blowing through a stop sign. This wasn't an accident. It was arrogance and alcohol fused into something lethal. In court, the grief spilled into raw words. Survivor Albert Boswell faced Carrier and said, "Not only did you take this from me, but you took the chance to grow this from me." Michelle Ruard, speaking for the families, told him, "I want you to wake up every morning and think of the lives you've lost." In October 2018, Judge Michael P. Hattie handed down a sentence of 32 to 60 years, ensuring Carrier wouldn't see the outside world until he was at least 55. For some, it was a relief, but for the families, it didn't change the empty chairs, the birthdays that would never be celebrated, the grandchildren who would grow up never knowing their loved ones. The courtroom was filled with both justice and unbearable grief, 2 things that can never balance each other. And in the cruelest twist of fate, Candace Dunn, honored that very evening for helping others rebuild their lives and avoid prison, was killed only hours later by a man who never should have been on the road. Her death, along with the others, stands as a devastating reminder. Drunk driving doesn't just steal strangers. It rips apart families, destroys legacies, and leaves communities hollowed out. The crash in Michigan proves one haunting truth. When someone chooses to drink and drive, they aren't just gambling with their own life. They are gambling with everyone else's. And the cost, as the families of Candace, Linda, Jerome, Justin, and Preston know too well, is far higher than the driver ever imagines.
That made national news. No doubt you saw it. A man involved in a crash in Glendale Friday was ejected from his car onto a freeway sign. Tonight, the victim's cousin is speaking out.
It was the morning of October 30th, 2015, in Los Angeles. There was 20-year-old Richard Pananian from Burbank behind the wheel of his 2004 Ford Fiesta. He was dressed and ready for his first day on the job at the Glendale Collision Center. Richard loved cars, fixing them, driving them. By 7 a.m., the young man would be gone, and the way it happened stunned the city, shocked the nation. Just 5 days earlier, Richard's family had gathered in a sacred moment. They had performed a matah, a traditional Armenian Christian ritual. Richard had been through serious health struggles before. His cousin, Armen Kardashian, said his life had once been spared. and their faith was unshaken. This ritual, they believed, would shield him from harm. They felt peace afterward, hope, but that sense of protection would unravel in the most surreal and horrifying way imaginable. Around 7 a.m., Richard's Ford Fiesta was weaving through traffic near the Griffith Park stretch of the freeway. Witnesses watched in disbelief as the small car sped between lanes, passed on the right shoulder, darted past slower drivers. He was moving too fast, too recklessly. There was no room for error. Then it happened. His car clipped the rear end of a Ford F-150, moving at about 50 miles per hour. What followed was chaos. Richard's car flipped. The vehicle shot up an embankment like a launched rocket. And then came the moment that made the world stop. Richard was ejected with such force, he was launched more than 20 feet into the air. He didn't land on the pavement. He didn't land in a ditch. He landed on top of a massive freeway sign, high above the road, on the Colorado Street exit. For a moment, drivers thought it was a Halloween stunt, a fake body on a freeway sign. It couldn't be real, but it was. Richard's lifeless body lay sprawled across the metal structure, visible to hundreds of stunned commuters trapped in the traffic jam below. Emergency calls came flooding in. LA Fire rushed to the scene. By the time they arrived, it was too late. The California Highway Patrol launched an immediate investigation. Officer Edgar Figueroa confirmed that Richard had been driving recklessly. Los Angeles Fire Department spokesman Brian Humphrey confirmed that Richard was already gone when help arrived. He never stood a chance. The crash happened just outside Griffith Park, near Atwater Village. For hours, the freeway was shut down. Later, Richard's cousin Armin spoke out. He insisted Richard always wore a seatbelt. He had even installed a 5-point harness system in his car. He was safety-minded, not reckless. But CHP officers were certain there was no restraint used that morning. And then came the question no one could answer. Why? The timing only made it harder to accept. Just 5 days before his family had performed the Matah. On their GoFundMe page, Armin wrote, "In the Armenian culture, sacrifices are done when someone escapes death, as Richard's life was once spared. But now, Richard is gone." He called it ironic, bitterly so. Not only did God choose to take this young man's life, Armin wrote, but decided to make such a spectacle out of it. Back home, the Pananian family was left broken, confused, searching for meaning in a tragedy that offered none. That freeway sign became more than a marker. It was a scar burned into the memory of a city, a symbol of a life that ended in the most brutal, public, and unexplainable way. The coroner, Lieutenant David Smith, later reported that Richard had suffered multiple fractures. The exact cause of death was unclear. Toxicology results would take months. The driver of the pickup and 2 passengers walked away unharmed, but no one who saw that scene would ever forget it. It was a night in January 2022 in Vula. The red Ferrari appeared. Zortsis Manoios, a 45-year-old businessman from Mykonos, was in the car. It was his first drive in the car he'd waited years to own. A Ferrari 488 worth £250,000. To the world, Zortsis was more than a businessman. Nearly 2 decades earlier, he'd stepped into the public eye at just 23, appearing on the Greek version of The Wall, a popular reality show. A computer science student at the time, his calm presence and gentle eyes made him a standout. A brief romance with fellow contestant Giannakopoulou didn't last long, but it kept his name alive in the media long after the cameras stopped rolling. After the show, he left the spotlight behind and returned to Mykonos. There, he built something real, a clothing brand called Georgie. It started with one store, then another. Tourists knew his name. Locals respected it. He wasn't flashy, but he had charm. With Athena, he had 2 children. But all of that shattered in seconds. Just under 2 miles from the dealership where he'd picked up his dream car, Zortsis was driving along Constantinou Karamanli Street. At some point, something appeared on the road. A pedestrian, witnesses would later say. Zortsis reacted. The Ferrari swerved, and then came the sound dot. The car slammed into a tree. The front crumpled like paper. Flames exploded almost instantly, lighting up the night like a flare. Greek singer Stan happened to be driving behind them. He saw it all. He watched the fire ignite. Without hesitating, he ran toward the wreck. Athena had been partially thrown from the car, injured, broken, but still reachable. Stan got to her just in time. He pulled her away from the inferno as the fire surged. She collapsed, burned and bloodied, but alive. Zortzis was still inside. His body was trapped behind the wheel, flames licking the interior. Another relative who had been following in a separate car arrived seconds later and tried to reach him, but it was too late. Bystanders stood helpless as the Ferrari was consumed in fire. Footage taken by onlookers showed the car engulfed, the paint blistering off, the metal turning black in seconds. Zortzis' body was found inside, charred beyond recognition. The drive had lasted just minutes. His life ended almost as soon as it began anew. Athena was rushed to the General State Hospital of Nicaea. For days, her condition remained uncertain, but she survived. Police launched an investigation immediately. Zortzis' sister, Katerina Manoios, a member of the Greek parliament, was flooded with messages from across the country. People remembered her brother not for the flames, but for his warmth, his gentleness, his quiet strength. In the years that followed, Athena recovered physically, but the emotional scars never faded. She and Katerina focused on one thing, raising the children in a way that honored who Zortzis was, calm, kind, and deeply loved. It was just after 3 a.m. on a quiet Sunday morning, October 2nd, 2022, in St. Petersburg, Florida. 3 teenage boys moved silently through a neighborhood, like shadows in the night. 15-year-olds Mario Bonilla and Kandre Lang, along with 16-year-old Malachi Daniels, weren't out for a walk. They weren't going anywhere in particular. They were searching, not for something specific, but for opportunity. Lang used the edge of his shirt to pull on car door handles, one by one, careful not to leave fingerprints. They didn't expect anything dramatic, maybe a wallet, maybe loose change. But then, at a driveway near 62nd Avenue North and 28th Street North, they found it. A white 2016 Maserati, unlocked, keys sitting right there inside, waiting. Lang slid into the driver's seat. Bonilla took the front passenger spot. Daniels climbed in back. None of them had licenses. None of them had permission. None of them had any idea they were being watched. Overhead, silent in the night sky, a sheriff's helicopter had been circling the area on an unrelated call, until it noticed movement below. 3 figures, checking cars, then slipping into the Maserati. The deputies in the air didn't hesitate. They radioed for ground units. At 3:20 a.m., the Maserati rolled out of the driveway and turned onto 62nd Avenue. No headlights, no hesitation. It was now a stolen vehicle on the move. On the ground, marked patrol cars pulled up, emergency lights flashing. But the chase didn't happen the way you'd expect. The Pinellas County Sheriff's Office had rules. No high-speed pursuits unless absolutely necessary. A supervising sergeant called it off. Deputies slowed to 35 miles per hour and fell back. But Lang didn't know that. He thought he was being hunted. He panicked. He floored it. The helicopter continued to track the car from above, recording everything. Lang pushed the gas harder, faster. The Maserati tore through the night like a bullet. And then, in an instant, everything shattered. The car was flying, 123 miles per hour. No seatbelts, no control. The Maserati jumped a curb, slammed into a business sign, flipped, and came crashing down on its roof in a parking lot. Crushed, folded in half, Bonilla never had a chance. He died instantly in the passenger seat. Daniels was mangled in the back, critically injured, clinging to life. Lang survived, but barely, pulled from the wreckage with serious injuries. Deputies arrived within seconds. The scene was chaos. Broken glass, twisted steel, the stench of gasoline in the air. The helicopter's camera had caught it all, from the boys slipping into the car to the final, horrific crash just 90 seconds later. Inside the destroyed vehicle, investigators found something else. A .25 caliber handgun, rusted and old, unregistered since 1968. None of the boys were hardened criminals, but they were slipping. Just 3 weeks earlier, on September 11th, they had been stopped by deputies while wandering another neighborhood before dawn. Parents were called. No charges filed. Everyone hoped it was a close call, a warning. But that night, they left their homes unnoticed, slipped into the dark with no good plan and no idea what was coming. In the days after, investigators sat with the families. One father said he had even transferred his son to another school, hoping for a fresh start, hoping to steer him away from trouble. But fate had already turned. Sheriff Bob Gualtieri didn't sugarcoat it. They were making bad decisions, he said, and they hadn't faced any real consequences. Until now. The owner of the Maserati, who'd left the car unlocked with the keys inside, was contacted. His mistake, too, had consequences. At a press conference, the sheriff urged the public, "Lock your cars. don't leave keys inside, because one careless choice can lead to tragedy. And this was tragedy. One boy dead, another fighting for his life, the third alive but likely to spend years behind bars, all before reaching adulthood.
A father is outraged after his daughter was billed for a guardrail that he says contributed to her death. Hannah Eimers died in a car crash last November in Tennessee.
It was November 1st, 2016, in McMinn County, Tennessee. 17-year-old Hannah Eimers was heading home after a Halloween night spent with friends. She and her friend were driving north on Interstate 75, the quiet hum of the road beneath them. But in an instant, everything changed. The car veered off the road. No one knows why. Maybe it was fatigue, maybe a brief distraction. Hannah tried to correct the wheel, but the vehicle swerved violently toward the median, straight into a guardrail. But this wasn't just any guardrail. This was a Lindsay X-Lite, a design meant to save lives, a device meant to crumple on impact, to absorb the force, to slow the vehicle and protect its passengers. But that morning it didn't. Instead of collapsing, the rail acted like a spear. The steel sliced through the front of the car, punched through the driver's side, and kept going, through Hannah's head and chest, until it shoved her into the back seat. The car dragged the metal monster for nearly 20 feet before it finally stopped. Hannah died instantly. She never had a chance. Beside her, her friend sat in stunned silence, surviving with nothing more than a minor cut. Hannah wasn't just another teenager. She was the oldest of 10 in a blended family, a brilliant girl who had earned her high school diploma at 15. She was fluent in multiple languages, gifted in music and acting, and passionate about working with children with special needs. She'd even learned sign language so she could connect with them more deeply. And just like that, she was gone. Her father, Steve Eimers, an EMT who had seen more crashes than he could count, couldn't believe what had happened. A crash that should have been survivable turned into a nightmare. How could the friend walk away with a scratch while Hannah didn't? That question haunted him. But what came next made it worse. 4 months later, a letter arrived, addressed to Hannah from the Tennessee Department of Transportation. Inside was a bill for nearly $3,000, a charge for replacing the very guardrail that had killed her. Steve was stunned. How could they? They will take your life and then send you a bill, he said bitterly. But the deeper Steve dug, the more horrifying the truth became. Just a week before Hannah's crash, Tennessee had quietly removed the X-Lite from its list of approved safety devices. They knew something was wrong. They knew these guardrails weren't safe at highway speeds, but over 1,000 of them still lined the state's roads, including the one that killed his daughter. Steve's search for answers uncovered even more disturbing facts. At least 19 people across the U.S. had died in crashes involving X-Lites. Time and again, the rails hadn't collapsed like they were supposed to. They hadn't saved lives. They had become deadly weapons. Grief turned Steve into a man on a mission. He traveled over 20,000 miles inspecting X-Lite installations in more than 15 states. What he found horrified him. Damaged rails left unrepaired, rails installed incorrectly, rails that were accidents waiting to happen. In North Carolina alone, he checked over 200 of them, and nearly every single one had serious issues. Some states took action. Tennessee began pulling X-Lites from roads with speed limits over 45 miles per hour. But in other places, like North Carolina, more than 3,500 remained. Officials said it would cost over $20 million to replace them all. Meanwhile, lives hung in the balance. And there was another dark truth. The government had relied on private labs to test these guardrails, labs owned by the very companies that made them. The X-Lite was tested and approved by a lab belonging to its own manufacturer. A 2016 federal report called this what it was, a dangerous conflict of interest. It took years, but Steve's relentless advocacy helped change that. A new rule in the 2021 infrastructure bill now demands independent testing of highway safety equipment. But for Steve, and for families like his, it came far too late.
A 29-year-old man has been charged with 20 offences, including manslaughter and high-range drink driving, after 4 children were killed in Sydney.
It was February 1st, 2020, in Oatlands, a quiet suburb of Western Sydney. For the Abdallah and Sakra families, it was just another Saturday. 7 children walked together toward a local shop, laughing, planning to buy ice cream. Among them were siblings Anthony, Angelina, and Sienna Abdallah, their cousin Veronique Sakra, and 3 friends. But within seconds, everything turned into a nightmare. Behind the wheel of a blue Mitsubishi 4WD was 30-year-old Samuel William Davidson. He had been drinking since morning, beer, rum, vodka cruisers, mixing it with drugs like MDMA. Witnesses later remembered him shirtless, laughing, making obscene gestures as he sped recklessly through Sydney's suburbs. He ran red lights, forced drivers off the road, swerved between lanes as if nothing could stop him. By the time he reached Beddington Road, his car was a missile. In a 50 km/h zone, he pushed 133. At impact, he was still flying at 111. The vehicle mounted the curb and plowed straight into the group of children. The force scattered bodies across 17 meters, some dragged against a fence. 4 were killed instantly. Anthony, 13, Angelina, 12, Sienna, just 8 years old, and their cousin Veronique, 11. 3 others were left broken, one slipping into a coma for weeks. Davidson stepped out of the wreck unharmed. Shocked witnesses heard him mutter, "What have I done? I'm going to jail." The scene drew nearly 200 people. Grief was so raw, so overwhelming, police had to call in the riot squad to hold the crowd back. Cameras captured Davidson shirtless, handcuffed, being dragged away. And the next morning, when microphones crowded outside the Abdallah home, the world expected silence. Instead, Danny Abdallah stood there, broken but unshaken, describing each of his children. Anthony, a young basketballer dreaming of honoring Kobe Bryant. Angelina, his little helper. Sienna, the actress of the family, bursting with life. Through tears, he said, "These kids were just walking innocently. And now I've lost 3 of them." But what stunned everyone was his wife Layla's words. Through unimaginable grief, she said she did not hate Davidson. That choice, to forgive, stopped the nation cold. While Davidson's parents insisted their son was a good man who lost his way, the Abdallahs chose to respond not with rage, but mercy. In April 2021, Davidson pleaded guilty to 9 charges, including 4 counts of manslaughter. He was sentenced to 28 years, later reduced to 20. In prison, he turned to faith, reading the Bible, clinging to the family's forgiveness as his only lifeline. He eventually met Danny Abdallah face to face. They prayed together. Danny told him about each child. When asked if Davidson should stay in prison, Danny's response was haunting. "If it were up to me, I'd bring him out tomorrow. Justice is to have my kids back." The crash site became a shrine. Thousands left flowers, candles, toys, and photos. Courtrooms overflowed with grief-stricken statements. Veronique's mother said, "No court or sentence can ever compensate for what we've lost." And yet, the Abdallah's message never changed. Through unbearable pain, they spoke of forgiveness, of choosing love over hate. Danny's words echoed across the country. There are no winners in this. All we can do is try to find joy in the middle of pain. It was just past midnight on October 24th, 2024, when a chilling silence fell over Lakeshore Boulevard East in Toronto. Moments earlier, the sound of screeching tires had ripped through the night, followed by a devastating explosion that lit up the darkness like a warning flare. In the wreckage, a Tesla Model Y burned violently, flames swallowing it whole before anyone could make sense of what had just happened. Inside that car were 5 young people. Friends, dreamers, lives in motion. Digvijay Patel, Neil Raj Gohil, and his sister Kataba Gohil. They never had a chance. What started as a drive turned into something far more horrifying. The vehicle, for reasons still under investigation, lost control. It slammed into a guardrail, then collided with a concrete pillar at terrifying speed. And then, the fire, immediate and unforgiving. Most people don't realize that Tesla vehicles, while packed with high-tech safety systems, are powered by lithium-ion batteries that can ignite in a crash and are nearly impossible to put out. That night, the fire spread so fast the car became a furnace within seconds. But what made the tragedy even worse was the failure of the electronic door system. The power was gone, the doors locked. Trapped inside, the passengers had no way out. Tesla does have manual door releases, but in the chaos of a burning car, smoke choking your lungs, and seconds ticking away, who can think clearly? That night, the same technology designed to protect them became their biggest obstacle. But somehow, one survived. A 25-year-old woman in the back seat was still conscious, but pinned. The heat was closing in fast. That's when Rick Harper, a Canada Post worker passing by, saw the burning vehicle. Without hesitating, he grabbed a metal pole, shattered the rear window, and helped the woman crawl out. She escaped with her life. Barely. What Harper didn't realize was that 4 others were still inside. Smoke filled the cabin. The fire spread too fast. By the time anyone could respond, it was already too late. The aftermath left Toronto in shock. How could a vehicle, marketed as one of the safest on the road, become a steel tomb? Tesla boasts features like automatic braking, stability control, and stellar crash test ratings. But when power is lost, none of that matters. All those features vanish with the electricity. And this wasn't the first time. The lone survivor now carries emotional scars few can imagine. She lived, but lost 4 of her closest friends. Jay, Digviji, Neil, and Kataba had full lives ahead of them. Now just memories remain. Authorities are still trying to determine what caused the crash. The only certainty is that once the Tesla hit the pillar, it became a death trap. A high-tech machine built for safety turned into something no one could escape from. Tesla, for its part, continues to point to its strong safety record, citing crash test ratings, low rollover risks, and autopilot features. But those statistics mean little when basic functions, like opening a door in an emergency, fail when needed most. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration has already raised red flags about the Model Y, from sudden braking to unintended acceleration. But those sound like technical terms until they're tied to real people, real deaths, and real grief. Toronto is left mourning. 4 families shattered, 1 survivor left with the weight of memory and trauma, and a haunting question. How could a car built with so much intelligence fail in the most critical moment? This isn't just a story about one car crash. It's about what happens when innovation gets ahead of safety, when sleek design overlooks real-world survival. Tesla may have redefined the car industry, but this tragedy is a stark reminder. No matter how advanced the technology, it must work when it counts. It was April 28, 2023, a warm night in Folly Beach, South Carolina. Samantha Miller, 34, had just married the love of her life, Arik Hutchinson. Their wedding had been everything they dreamed. Simple, joyful, unforgettable. After the reception, they climbed into a golf cart to ride into their new life. Samantha, still in her wedding dress, turned to Arik and smiled. "I don't want the night to end," she said, but it was about to. Nearby, Jaime Komoroski, 25, was getting into her car after spending the day drinking. Witnesses saw her stumbling, slurring, clearly drunk. No one stopped her, not friends, not bartenders. Her blood alcohol level was more than 3 times the legal limit. But she drove anyway. She was going 65 in a 25 zone when she crashed into the golf cart. The impact was devastating. Arik was thrown, suffering brain trauma, shattered bones, and a broken heart. Samantha died instantly. One moment she was glowing in her wedding dress, the next, gone. When police arrived, Komoroski refused a sobriety test. She insisted she'd done nothing wrong, but the evidence told the truth. Her toxicology report made it undeniable. She should never have been behind the wheel. While Komoroski was taken to jail, Arik lay in a hospital bed, surrounded by tubes and monitors. Doctors worked to repair his body, but nothing could touch the damage done to his soul. He had to be told that the woman he had just vowed to spend forever with was already gone. At her funeral, he wore a suit over his hospital gown. The casts and bruises didn't hurt nearly as much as knowing Samantha would never walk through their front door again. In court, Arik barely managed to speak. "I wish I'd seen it coming," he said through tears. "I would have jumped off the golf cart so you would only have run me over." His voice wasn't angry. It was hollowed out by grief. Komoroski pleaded guilty to DUI, resulting in death and reckless homicide. She apologized in court and promised to spend her life helping others with addiction. But Samantha's family didn't want words. They wanted Samantha. Her mother, Lisa Miller, faced Komoroski and said, "She didn't just take my child, she took all of us." 2 of Arik's relatives who had been riding with them were also seriously injured. One crash had shattered multiple lives. Komoroski was sentenced to 25 years in prison. Her lawyers appealed, arguing that media attention influenced the verdict. The court disagreed. This wasn't about headlines. It was about a life cut short on the happiest night of all. Arik filed a lawsuit, not only against Komoroski, but also the bars that kept serving her. He wanted to hold them accountable for ignoring the signs. This wasn't revenge. It was a plea for change, so no one else would have to bury a bride before the honeymoon. Samantha's story lingers. A woman full of joy and promise, taken in seconds by someone else's recklessness. It's a brutal reminder. Drunk driving doesn't just ruin lives, it ends them. There's a silence now where laughter used to be. A ring that won't be worn, a dress that will never be passed down. Arik still speaks out, still fights, because Samantha deserves more than memories. She deserves to be a wake-up call. It was July 19th, 2025, in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. A single piece of news swept through the kingdom like wildfire. Prince Al-Walid bin Khaled bin Talal Saud, known across the world as the Sleeping Prince, had passed away. He was only 36 years old. For 2 decades, his life had been frozen in time, suspended between hope and heartbreak, as millions quietly followed his story. Families whispered his name in prayers, strangers held on to the thought of a miracle, and his father refused to let go. But after 20 years in a hospital bed, that fragile chapter finally came to an end. To understand the weight of this moment, we need to go back to where it all began. Prince Al-Walid was born on April 18, 1989, into one of the most powerful families in Saudi Arabia. His father, Prince Khaled bin Talal, was a respected royal. His uncle, Prince Al-Walid bin Talal, was a billionaire known worldwide. His grandfather, Prince Talal, was one of the sons of King Abdulaziz, the very founder of modern Saudi Arabia. Al-Walid's future was written in power and responsibility. From a young age, he was raised with discipline, honor, and the expectation of greatness. By the age of 15, he was already training at a prestigious military academy in London, preparing for a future that seemed unstoppable. And then, in an instant, it was all taken away. In 2005, while in the United Kingdom, Al-Walid was in a devastating car crash. The impact left him with catastrophic brain injuries and severe internal damage. London doctors fought to stabilize him, but the truth was grim. He was flown back to Riyadh and admitted to King Abdulaziz Medical City. There, his body lived, but his eyes never opened again. Machines kept him alive. A ventilator breathed for him. A feeding tube nourished him. And from that day on, the prince who was once so full of promise was locked away in silence. Doctors had little hope. Many said recovery was impossible. In 2015, 10 years into his coma, the medical team even urged his father to consider ending life support. But Prince Khaled would not hear of it. He stayed by his son's side every single day, gripping his hand, whispering prayers, and believing that one day his son would return. He shared photos of himself holding Al-Walid's hand, decorating the hospital room for Ramadan, Eid, and Saudi National Day. It became less of a hospital ward and more of a shrine of devotion. And the world watched. For years, family, friends, and religious leaders visited Al-Walid. His younger brothers, Saud and Muhammad, spoke to him, updated him on family life, prayed beside him. They clung to hope in the smallest gestures. And then, in 2020, something extraordinary happened. A video surfaced online, showing the prince appearing to move his fingers and even lift his hand when someone called his name. The footage spread like wildfire. People everywhere believed this was the miracle they had been waiting for. Hope surged again. But doctors crushed the dream, saying it was nothing more than reflexes of a body trapped in a vegetative state. Still, the people refused to stop believing. They called him the Sleeping Prince. They shared old videos of him in uniform, young and strong, and they waited for the day he would awaken. But that day never came. On July 19th, 2025, after 20 long years in the same hospital room, Prince Al-Walid slipped away. His father broke the news on X, posting a haunting black and white photo of his son along with a plea for prayers. The next day, funeral prayers were held at Imam Turki bin Abdullah Mosque in Riyadh. The doors were opened to the public, and thousands came to pay their respects. Crowds gathered outside Al-Fakhraya Palace, mourning a prince whose story had touched hearts far beyond the kingdom's borders. No official explanation was given. No one knows if his condition had worsened or if, after 2 decades of waiting, the family had finally made the impossible decision to let go. What is known is the impact he left behind. The hashtag #SleepingPrince trended once more as tributes poured in from around the globe. People remembered not just the tragedy of his youth, but the love that surrounded him for 20 years. Samantha Serio was the embodiment of balance of strength, intellect, and purpose. A senior at Auburn University, she wasn't just a gymnast. She was a scholar, an engineer, a perfectionist. While others chased fame, Samantha chased the stars literally. With a job offer from Boeing and her aerospace engineering degree nearly complete, she seemed destined to conquer every challenge she set her mind to. On the mat, she moved with elegance and precision. Off it, she carried herself with humility and discipline. Teammates admired her. Coaches trusted her. The future was hers to command. And then, in a single, brutal moment, it all changed. April 5th, 2019. NCAA Regional Semifinals in Baton Rouge. It should have been another exhilarating performance. One more chance for Samantha to help Auburn advance. The arena buzzed with energy. Music, cheers, chalk dust in the air, routine warm-ups. Nothing out of the ordinary. Samantha stepped onto the floor with quiet focus, ready to pour 18 years of her life into a final, flawless routine. Then came the tumbling pass, the double front flip, and then the sound. A sickening, heart-stopping collapse. She had under-rotated by just a fraction of a second. It was enough. Both knees buckled. She crumpled to the mat, screaming in pain. Tendons tore, knees dislocated. The music stopped. The crowd went silent. Medical staff rushed in, but even as she remained conscious, the agony was unbearable. Within hours, video footage of the accident had spread across the internet. Millions watched. Millions dissected the worst moment of her life, and Samantha, already grappling with unimaginable pain, saw her private disaster turned into public spectacle. "My pain is not your entertainment," she tweeted. Later, in an interview with Today, she said, "You kind of want to watch it just to see what happens, but you don't think about the people it could impact." Her courage became a new kind of strength, not about sticking a landing, but about reclaiming her dignity. Weeks later, she posted on Instagram, "I am hanging up my grips and leaving the chalk behind." Gymnastics was over, but Samantha's voice remained firm, her spirit unbroken. Her next goal? Walk down the aisle on her own feet? Through multiple surgeries and months of grueling therapy, she fought back, refusing to let her body dictate her future. And when she finally walked down that aisle, she smiled with every step, a victory of resilience over tragedy. Her story didn't just end with retirement. It sparked a conversation. Why were dangerous routines still rewarded? Why weren't safer measures in place to protect athletes like her? Coach Jeff Graba later called that night one of the toughest of my life. But Samantha's grace became a guidepost for everyone who witnessed it. She reminded the world that true strength isn't only about what happens in the air, it's about how you rise when everything falls.
In the early hours of March 18, 2012, at around 4 a.m., a tragic accident occurred near the Baofu-Siqiao Bridge in Haidian District, Beijing. A Ferrari supercar was speeding recklessly from west to east when it lost control at the southeastern corner of the bridge.
It was March 18, 2012, in Beijing. On the North 4th Ring Road, something was tearing through the darkness. A black Ferrari 458 Spider, roaring far beyond the speed limit. Inside were 3 young passengers. The man behind the wheel, just 23 years old. His name, Ling Gu. But this wasn't just any rich kid out for a joyride. Ling was the only son of Ling Jihua, one of China's most powerful political figures, a man deeply connected to then-President Hu Jintao. The Ferrari lost control near Baofuzi Bridge and slammed into a wall at terrifying speed. The crash was catastrophic. Ling Gu was killed instantly. One of the 2 women with him also died, while the other survived, but just barely. Her injuries were devastating. She would never walk again. First responders who arrived on the scene found the car mangled beyond recognition. At first, no one could even identify who they were. But soon, rumors began to swirl. Whispers turned into online chatter. A photo of the wreckage found its way into the Beijing Evening News, then exploded across Chinese social media. Who was the driver? Why was a $500,000 Ferrari speeding through Beijing in the dead of night with 2 barely clothed women inside? The questions were just starting. Then, just as quickly as the photo appeared, it vanished. Comments disappeared. Entire threads were erased. Searches for Ferrari, Little Ling, or Prince Ling suddenly returned nothing. It was as if the crash had never happened. Behind the scenes, powerful hands were scrambling. The government was working overtime to bury the story. Ling Gu's name was changed in official reports. Some say to Jia, a word that, in Mandarin, sounds like fake. Coincidence? Maybe. But it caused even more confusion. Another official with the surname Jia reportedly expressed anger at the rumors, adding to the chaos. Even Ling's own father was shown the body, but allegedly denied it was his son. The cover-up machinery kicked into full gear. There were reports that Ling Jihua reached out to Zhou Yongkang, head of China's powerful legal and political affairs department, begging for help to make the story disappear. Publicly, the Chinese government said nothing, not a word. But behind closed doors in Beijing's political circles, the truth was clear. The timing couldn't have been worse. China was weeks away from a major leadership transition. President Hu was stepping down. Xi Jinping was preparing to take power. Ling Jihua had been expected to ascend into China's elite Politburo Standing Committee. But 5 months after the crash, without explanation, he was quietly removed from his role and reassigned to a lesser position. It wasn't just a demotion, it was a fall from grace. The story would have stayed buried, but then the South China Morning Post broke the silence. They confirmed Ling Gu had in fact died in the crash. Global outlets picked up the story. Foreign media speculated on the more scandalous details, claims of sexual activity in the car, hush money, even oil executives stepping in to clean things up. Meanwhile, in China, the silence continued, but the people noticed. Online, netizens raged. How could a young man from a government family with an $8,000 a year salary afford a Ferrari? Why did these so-called princelings live lives of obscene wealth while ordinary people struggled? Reports surfaced that the families of the two women were paid off to keep quiet. Some claimed the money came from politically connected business leaders. Efforts were made to spread misinformation online, using fake accounts to discredit the rumors. But by then, the damage was done. The truth was out, and the story, despite government efforts, refused to die. Among Ling Gu's classmates, the silence was even more eerie. One former roommate recalled how they had planned to attend graduate school together. After the crash, he never saw him again. No memorial, no mention, just gone. The crash was never officially acknowledged, but people kept whispering.
I'll never forget the accident scene itself.
A mother and 4 young children killed in a head-on collision up in Westchester.
It was a Sunday morning, July 26, 2009, in Westchester County, New York. Diane Schuler, a 36-year-old mother of 2, was behind the wheel of her brother's minivan, heading home from a family camping trip. Her 5-year-old son, Brian, sat in the back seat, along with her 3 young nieces. It was supposed to be a peaceful drive back to West Babylon. Her husband, Daniel, followed close behind in his truck, the family dog by his side. They left the Hunter Lake campground around 9:30 a.m. After a quick stop at McDonald's for breakfast, Diane seemed completely fine, smiling, composed, in control. Nothing appeared out of the ordinary. They made one more stop at a gas station where she asked for pain medication, but the store didn't have any. Still, there was nothing that suggested anything was wrong. Not yet. At 11 a.m., she called her brother Warren to say they were running a bit late because of traffic. Again, she sounded normal. Just another mom making her way home with a car full of kids. But by noon, something changed. Drivers on the highway began calling in reports. A red minivan was driving aggressively. One driver even claimed to have seen a woman vomiting on the side of the road. The reports kept coming, but no one knew what was really happening inside that van. At 12:58 p.m., the first real alarm came from inside the vehicle. Diane's 8-year-old niece Emma called her father in a panic. She said something was wrong. Her aunt couldn't see properly. She wasn't acting right. Warren immediately called Diane. She picked up, but her voice was slurred, disoriented. She called him by the wrong name. When he urged her to pull over and wait, she insisted everything was fine, blaming the kids for distracting her. But it was clear something was very, very wrong. By the time Warren reached where she was supposed to be, the van was gone. Then, at 1:30 p.m., Diane made a turn that sealed their fate. She entered the Taconic State Parkway, going the wrong way, southbound, in the northbound lane. Witnesses were horrified. The minivan was speeding at over 80 miles per hour, barreling straight toward oncoming traffic. Some drivers swerved, others didn't have a chance. At 1:35 p.m., everything came to a violent, devastating end. The minivan slammed head-on into a Chevrolet Trailblazer. The force of the impact caused another vehicle, a Chevrolet Tracker, to crash as well. It all happened in just 3 minutes. 7 people died instantly. Diane, her 2-year-old daughter, Erin, her nieces, 5-year-old Kate, 7-year-old Allison, and 8-year-old Emma, all gone. In the Trailblazer, 81-year-old Michael Bastardi, his 49-year-old son Guy, and their 74-year-old friend Dan Longo didn't make it either. Somehow, Brian, Diane's 5-year-old son, survived, though he was badly injured. One of his cousins was pulled from the wreckage alive but passed away later in the hospital. In the end, Brian was the only one left. His life forever changed. As the wreckage cooled and investigators examined the scene, they made a chilling discovery: a broken bottle of vodka inside the van. Toxicology reports came next, and they told a story few were ready to hear. Diane's blood alcohol level was 0.19%, more than twice the legal limit. She also had high levels of THC in her system, pointing to recent marijuana use. The findings stunned everyone who knew her. Diane had always been seen as responsible, caring, a mother who wouldn't dream of endangering her kids. Her husband, Daniel, refused to believe it. He insisted something else had to be at play. He pushed for answers. He had her samples retested. He searched for any explanation that could make sense of what happened. But the results didn't change. Diane had been drunk and high behind the wheel with 5 children in the car. Officials ruled the crash as negligence, avoidable, tragic, and devastating. Public outrage followed. The story spread like wildfire. People wanted to understand. How could this happen? The crash led to legislative change. Then, Governor David Paterson signed the Child Passenger Protection Act, making it a felony in New York to drive under the influence with a child in the vehicle. But for the families who lost everything, no law could fix what was already broken.
2 people are dead after a car crash that left one car cut in half this afternoon, according to Dallas Fire Rescue. Happened about 3:15 this afternoon at Abrams Road near Royal Lane in the Lake Highlands area.
It was December afternoon in Dallas, Texas, just after 3 p.m. A black McLaren hypercar shot down Abrams Road like a bullet, slicing through traffic with terrifying speed. Witnesses later said the engine wasn't just loud, it screamed. This wasn't a casual drive. This was raw, unleashed power. Inside the car were 2 men, 29-year-old Cristoel Flores Espino and 31-year-old Robert Leroy Rocha. The street they were on wasn't a racetrack. It was lined with homes, families, and children just released from Forest Meadow Middle School. And yet, the McLaren surged forward, swallowing distance with every blink. As the car neared the intersection of Abrams Road and Royal Lane, it lost control. The hypercar veered sharply, the tires screeching against the asphalt, and then, impact. The McLaren struck a massive tree with such force that the car split in 2. By the time emergency crews from Dallas Fire Rescue arrived, the scene was already chaos. Pieces of the car were everywhere. Phones recorded the devastation, and Cristoel and Robert, both gone, pronounced dead at the scene. Their bodies trapped in wreckage so mangled it took heavy rescue tools just to get close. This wasn't an accident. It was a full-speed annihilation, and it didn't end there. Another vehicle, a gold Toyota sedan, had been hit or forced off the road. A woman was inside. She'd crashed into a separate tree during the chaos. Her car's front end was crushed, but she was alive. Paramedics rushed her to the hospital. Non-life-threatening injuries, they said. But she was shaken, broken, and lucky to be alive. The sound of the crash had drawn neighbors from their homes. Some ran toward the wreck. Others stood frozen on their lawns. 911 calls flooded in. Within minutes, the road was shut down. Photos and videos hit the internet fast. The McLaren was nearly unrecognizable. Its front half, the section carrying both men, had been crumpled into something that no longer resembled a car. The rear sat isolated in the street like some eerie monument to what had just happened. It was believed to be a McLaren 570S coupe, a masterpiece of engineering, a machine capable of hitting 62 miles per hour in just over 3 seconds, with a top speed north of 200. It was not built for roads like Abrams, not meant for school zones. Police began their investigation immediately. Lieutenant Tracy Jones told reporters they were looking at everything: speed, distractions, mechanical failure. There were no signs of a police chase, no reports of a stolen vehicle. At that point, no confirmation of substances involved. Just a silent, urgent question: why? The location made everything worse. This wasn't just any street. It was a zone where children cross every afternoon, where families walk hand in hand, a place where a speeding supercar doesn't just risk lives, it threatens an entire community's sense of safety. By morning, candles and flowers had appeared beneath the tree. Locals left handwritten notes. Some whispered prayers, others simply stood and stared at the damage. Though Cristoel and Robert weren't celebrities, their deaths rippled through the neighborhood like a shock wave. The street felt different now, heavier, quieter, broken. The McLaren 570S is made from carbon fiber, a material known for absorbing extreme impacts, but no engineering can compensate for decisions made in a split second at terrifying speed. The front of the car was so violently crushed it looked like it had been folded in half. The rear, though almost intact, had been hurled away with such force it might as well have belonged to a different vehicle. No one inside stood a chance. The woman in the Toyota survived and began helping police understand what happened in the final seconds. Her version of events helped clarify the scene, but not the why. That question lingers. Investigators are still combing through footage, vehicle data, and witness statements. They want to know, was it reckless speed alone? Or did something else trigger the crash? A mechanical failure? A moment of panic? A decision that couldn't be taken back? It was June 28, 2024, in Deer Park, Long Island. At Hawaii Nail and Spa, everyone was unaware that in just moments, their lives would change forever. Among them sat 30-year-old NYPD officer Amelia Renhack. She wasn't in uniform that day. Amelia had joined the force in 2018, proudly serving in the 102nd Precinct in Queens. Her husband, Detective Carl Renhack, also wore the badge. They had only been married since September. Amelia never made it to that wedding. At exactly 4:30 p.m., everything shattered. A 2020 Chevy Traverse came flying off the road like a missile. The SUV ripped through the parking lot, accelerator nearly to the floor, the engine roaring at 78 miles per hour, far past the legal limit. Then came the sound. Glass exploding, metal crushing, screams slicing through the chaos. 4 people were killed instantly. Amelia was one of them. Alongside her, 37-year-old salon owner Jan Kai Ken Chen, 41-year-old employee Yan Shu, and 50-year-old worker Maisie Zhang lost their lives. 9 others were badly hurt, including a 12-year-old girl who had simply come for a haircut. In the wreckage, amid shattered mirrors and pools of blood, the smell of alcohol lingered. Later, investigators pieced together the driver's movements that day. His name was Stephen Schwally, 64 years old. That morning at 11 a.m., he walked into a liquor store and bought 2 bottles of Montebello Long Island iced tea, a powerful pre-mixed drink. The cashier recognized him. Schwally was a regular, buying the same bottles almost daily. Hours before the crash, he was seen swerving across Deer Park, speeding recklessly, nearly mowing down pedestrians. Inside his SUV, police found the empty bottles. In his hotel room, they discovered another, unopened one waiting for him. And when officers asked him about the people he had just killed, his response was chilling. He didn't ask about them. He didn't even flinch. Instead, he said, "I haven't broken any laws. Can I get my license back? I'm a Marine." His blood alcohol level was 0.17, more than double the legal limit. And this wasn't the first time. In 2013, he had been arrested for crashing into a mailbox and later found asleep in his car with the engine running. His own brother admitted Stephen had been drinking and driving for years, often refusing breath tests, often brushing off consequences. "It's like my worst nightmare come true," he said. "I feel terrible about innocent people getting hurt." On August the 1st, 2024, Schwally stood in a courtroom facing a 38-count indictment, second-degree manslaughter, aggravated vehicular homicide, reckless driving, and more. He pleaded not guilty. If convicted, he could spend the rest of his life behind bars. In the courtroom sat Detective Carl Renhack. As the charges were read aloud, he broke down, tears streaming for the wife he had just married, the life they were supposed to build together now stolen forever. Other families sat beside him, their grief heavy in the air. John Kai Chen left behind his wife and 2 children. Yan Shu had been working tirelessly to support her sick mother and young son back in China. Maisie Zhang never even had a chance to react. Online, the outrage grew. People demanded justice, insisting Schwally should never walk free again. Suffolk County's district attorney said it best. This man had shown no concern for public safety, and NYPD Commissioner Edward Caban mourned not only for Amelia, but for every innocent life taken that day. It was June 28, 2024, in Deer Park, Long Island. At Hawaii Nail and Spa, everyone was unaware that in just moments, their lives would change forever. Among them sat 30-year-old NYPD officer Amelia Renhack. She wasn't in uniform that day. Amelia had joined the force in 2018, proudly serving in the 102nd Precinct in Queens. Her husband, Detective Carl Renhack, also wore the badge. They had only been married since September. Amelia never made it to that wedding. At exactly 4:30 p.m., everything shattered. A 2020 Chevy Traverse came flying off the road like a missile. The SUV ripped through the parking lot, accelerator nearly to the floor, the engine roaring at 78 miles per hour, far past the legal limit. Then came the sound. Glass exploding, metal crushing, screams slicing through the chaos. 4 people were killed instantly. Amelia was one of them. Alongside her, 37-year-old salon owner Jan Kai Ken Chen, 41-year-old employee Yan Shu, and 50-year-old worker Maisie Zhang lost their lives. 9 others were badly hurt, including a 12-year-old girl who had simply come for a haircut. In the wreckage, amid shattered mirrors and pools of blood, the smell of alcohol lingered. Later, investigators pieced together the driver's movements that day. His name was Stephen Schwally, 64 years old. That morning at 11 a.m., he walked into a liquor store and bought 2 bottles of Montebello Long Island iced tea, a powerful, pre-mixed drink. The cashier recognized him. Schwally was a regular, buying the same bottles almost daily. Hours before the crash, he was seen swerving across Deer Park, speeding recklessly, nearly mowing down pedestrians. Inside his SUV, police found the empty bottles. In his hotel room, they discovered another, unopened one waiting for him. And when officers asked him about the people he had just killed, his response was chilling. He didn't ask about them. He didn't even flinch. Instead, he said, "I haven't broken any laws. Can I get my license back? I'm a Marine." His blood alcohol level was 0.17, more than double the legal limit. And this wasn't the first time. In 2013, he had been arrested for crashing into a mailbox and later found asleep in his car with the engine running. His own brother admitted Stephen had been drinking and driving for years, often refusing breath tests, often brushing off consequences. "It's like my worst nightmare come true," he said. "I feel terrible about innocent people getting hurt." On August the 1st, 2024, Schwally stood in a courtroom facing a 38-count indictment: second-degree manslaughter, aggravated vehicular homicide, reckless driving, and more. He pleaded not guilty. If convicted, he could spend the rest of his life behind bars. In the courtroom sat Detective Carl Renhack. As the charges were read aloud, he broke down, tears streaming for the wife he had just married, the life they were supposed to build together now stolen forever. Other families sat beside him, their grief heavy in the air. John Kai-chen left behind his wife and 2 children. Yanshu had been working tirelessly to support her sick mother and young son back in China. Maisie Zhang never even had a chance to react. Online, the outrage grew. People demanded justice, insisting Schwally should never walk free again. Suffolk County's district attorney said it best. This man had shown no concern for public safety, and NYPD Commissioner Edward Caban mourned not only for Amelia, but for every innocent life taken that day.
Tonight, a driver who admitted to hitting and killing a pregnant woman while under the influence of drugs was sentenced today in Anaheim.
It was August night in Anaheim, California. The streets along Catella Avenue were quiet. For 23-year-old Yesenia Lisette Aguilar and her husband, James Alvarez, it was supposed to be nothing more than a peaceful evening walk. Yesenia was 35 weeks pregnant, just weeks away from meeting their baby girl, already named Adeline. But fate had something else waiting for them. From the opposite direction came a Jeep SUV, swerving dangerously close to the sidewalk. Behind the wheel was 44-year-old Courtney Pandolfi, a woman who had been warned again and again about the destruction her reckless choices could cause. Multiple prior DUI convictions, years of arrests, even a Watson advisement, a legal warning that if she ever drove drunk again and killed someone, it would be treated as murder. And yet here she was, high on cocaine, methamphetamine, and other drugs, barreling straight toward them. The Jeep jumped the curb. In one instant, Yesenia was struck with such force that she was thrown to the ground, lifeless before paramedics could even try to save her. James was left standing in shock, watching his world shatter in front of him. At the hospital, doctors made a desperate decision. They performed an emergency C-section, fighting to save the unborn child. Against all odds, baby Adeline survived. She clung to life while her father was left to process the unthinkable. His daughter would grow up never knowing the woman who gave her life. But as the case moved forward, the story grew even more infuriating. Pandolfi's record revealed a long trail of destruction, years of chances, years of warnings ignored. It wasn't a tragic accident. It was inevitability. She had chosen to drive high and impaired over and over again until finally her selfishness ended with death. In February 2024, she finally pled guilty to second-degree murder, DUI causing injury, driving on a suspended license, and drug possession. On April 12th, she was sentenced to 15 years to life in prison. For many, it still wasn't enough. How do you measure a sentence against the loss of a mother, the destruction of a family, the pain of a child who will grow up with only stories and pictures? At sentencing, James Alvarez stood in court holding baby Adeline in his arms. His voice cracked as he told Pandolfi, "I want you to see her face every single day. She will never know her mommy because of you." The courtroom was moved to tears. Even the judge admitted no punishment could ever fill the void. Today, Adeline is growing, a lively child with her mother's smile. But her story carries a haunting weight. She was born on September 20th, the very same date that marks her mother's death. Every birthday will forever be shadowed by tragedy, a reminder that her first breath came the same day her mother's was stolen. She was only 12, bright, joyful, full of life, the kind of girl who could light up a room without even trying. Trevin Hope Jocelyn wasn't just a student at Taverham High School in Norfolk. She was a presence, confident, kind, and one of the best gymnasts in her class. No one imagined that an ordinary day in gym class would be her last. It was March 12, 2014. Just another PE session. A simple gymnastics lesson. Nothing extreme, nothing dangerous, just children laughing, stretching, and tumbling across mats under the familiar echo of bouncing sneakers. Near the end of class, students could choose their favorite apparatus. Trevin, as always, was eager. She went for the pommel horse. She had already completed a few successful vaults. Everything seemed normal. She sprinted toward the horse with the grace and determination of a girl who had done this countless times before. But this time, her right foot caught the edge of the apparatus. A fraction of a second, a tiny misstep. Trevin tumbled forward, landing face down on the mat. At first, no one realized how serious it was. She looked like she might recover. Friends gathered around, some thinking she had simply been winded. But then the fear set in. She tried to speak, but the words barely came. Something was terribly wrong. The PE teacher rushed to her side. Staff called for help. The school's pastoral care supervisor, Lynn Hammond, began CPR. Everyone hoped, prayed that she would breathe, that she would be okay. But as Trevin was rushed to Addenbrooke's Hospital in Cambridge, the harsh truth was already taking hold. Doctors confirmed the unthinkable, a catastrophic hyperextension of the neck. Her spinal cord had been critically damaged. Trevin fought for her life for a week, but on March 19, 2014, she passed away. A bright, young life gone in the blink of an eye. The inquest revealed that Trevin had a pre-existing neck condition, one that could have limited her ability to safely participate in high-impact gymnastics. The school was aware, but not all staff had been informed due to an administrative oversight. Investigators were clear. It wasn't negligence. No wrongdoing was found. Even a child with a perfectly healthy neck could have suffered a fatal injury that day. Still, knowing there was no fault offered little comfort. The assistant head teacher, Shirley Naseby, remembered Trevin with tears. She was confident, enthusiastic, one of the better gymnasts in the class, she said. The last memory of Trevin, smiling mid-run, vaulting toward her future, remained painfully vivid. Her parents chose silence in the media, a grief too deep for words, but the school sought to honor her memory. A quiet garden was created, a cherry tree planted in her name. Head teacher Peter Ware said students and teachers still remember her warmth. She always had a smile on her face. She will be remembered with great fondness. The official verdict was accidental, but for anyone who has ever sent a child off to school thinking they were safe, it felt like more. It felt like the very fabric of an ordinary day had been ripped apart, leaving a void that could never be filled.
The man who took the lives of 3 young siblings and their grandfather while drunk behind the wheel has been granted full parole.
It was September 27, 2015 in Vaughan, Ontario. The Neville Lake family was on a simple outing in their minivan. Inside sat 6 people. 65-year-old Gary Neville, his wife Neriza, her mother Josefina Frias, and 3 bright young children. Daniel, just 9 years old. Harrison, 5, and little Millie, only 2. At the very same time, 29-year-old Marco Muzzo was returning from his bachelor party in Miami. He had been drinking heavily for days, even continuing on his private jet back to Toronto. He knew he wasn't sober, but still, he climbed into his black Jeep Cherokee after landing at Pearson International Airport. Later, he would admit he thought he could take a chance. That single, reckless decision would shatter lives forever. Around 4 p.m., Vaughan Fire and Rescue received the call. 2 vehicles, completely wrecked, at the intersection of Kirby Road and Kipling Avenue. Muzzo had blown through a stop sign, barreling at 85 kilometers per hour, about 53 miles an hour, through a quiet residential intersection. His Jeep slammed into the driver's side of the family's minivan in a violent T-bone collision. The impact was so devastating that over 30 first responders rushed to the scene, fighting desperately to save those inside. 4 were resuscitated at once, but it was too late. 9-year-old Daniel was killed instantly. Harrison and Millie were declared brain dead, passing away shortly after in the hospital. Their grandfather Gary didn't make it either. Nereza and Josefina survived, but their bodies carried the scars. Their souls carried even more. Witnesses at the scene watched in disgust as Muzo stumbled around, unable to stand, his body reeking of alcohol, his bladder uncontrollably released. Later, tests showed his blood alcohol level was almost 3 times the legal limit. He was arrested on the spot. That night, news stations flashed images of the mangled van across Canadian screens. Jennifer Neville Lake, the children's mother, recognized it immediately. She was taken to the hospital, where she identified the lifeless bodies of her children and her father. In one afternoon, she lost her entire world. The country erupted in shock and outrage. How could someone with a record of reckless behavior, 10 past speeding violations, and even a prior arrest for public intoxication, still be on the road? In February 2016, Muzo pleaded guilty to 4 counts of impaired driving causing death and 2 counts of causing bodily harm. By March, he was sentenced to 10 years in prison and handed a 12-year driving ban. It was the harshest sentence in Canadian history for a first-time impaired driving conviction. But for Jennifer, and for the millions watching, no sentence could ever measure up to the lives stolen that day. Muzo's time behind bars was cushioned in a minimum security facility. He applied for parole in 2018 but was denied. By 2020, he was granted day parole. By 2021, he walked free, serving less than half of his sentence. His release carried restrictions, but to many, it felt like justice had barely been served. For Jennifer, the toll only deepened. She revealed that at the time of the crash, she had been pregnant, but the trauma led to a miscarriage. Her husband, Edward Lake, fell into an abyss of despair. He often described his existence as living in a nightmare, consumed by grief he could not escape. On June 20th, 2022, just one day after Father's Day, Edward was found dead at the age of 49. Jennifer shared a heartbreaking message. "My children's father, Edward Lake, has joined our kids so they can play together forever." Her pain turned into purpose. Jennifer started a nonprofit called Many Hands Doing Good to support children living with trauma. Yet every year, she still visits her children's graves, placing their untouched lunchboxes there, writing what grade they should be in, reminding the world of the futures that were stolen. Even after Muzo's release, petitions spread across the country, calling for his wealthy family's name to be stripped from buildings they had funded. But hospitals and institutions refused, including Sick Kids Hospital, the very place where 2 of her children had been pronounced dead. Muzo himself issued a statement in 2020 saying, "I was careless and irresponsible. I will live with this for the rest of my life." But those words, hollow to many, could never balance the scales of justice. It was May 29th, 2016. The sun was beginning to dip over Maui, casting long shadows along the winding curves of the Hana Highway. In the car were 37-year-old twin sisters, Alexandria and Anastasia Duval. To the outside world, their bond looked unbreakable. But that afternoon, as the SUV moved along the cliffs, witnesses noticed something deeply unsettling. The 2 were fighting, not just arguing, screaming, hair pulling, yelling. One moment they were stopped in the road, hazard lights flashing. The next, the Explorer suddenly lurched forward and flew off a 200-foot cliff. Only one sister survived, Alexandria. Behind the wheel, Anastasia, the passenger, was pronounced dead at the scene. The silence after the crash didn't last long. A teenager named Joseph Toleafoa had seen everything. He heard the shouting, he saw the physical struggle, and then he watched the SUV shoot forward, accelerating straight over the edge without even trying to stop. Another witness, standing nearby, recalled seeing the passenger, Anastasia, grab Alexandria's hair and yank on the steering wheel just before the vehicle veered off course. When investigators recovered the wreck, they found strands of Alexandria's hair still clenched in Anastasia's hands. Alexandria was airlifted to the hospital. She didn't even know her sister had died until days into her recovery. Initially, authorities arrested her, but without enough evidence, they let her go. For a moment, it seemed like the case might disappear, but it didn't. Months later, a grand jury re-indicted her for second-degree murder. She was arrested in New York and flown back to Hawaii. The trial that followed didn't unfold like most. Alexandria waived her right to a jury. Instead, she placed her fate in the hands of one man, Judge Peter Cahill. As the courtroom filled with testimony, a different picture of the twins began to emerge. They weren't just bonded, they were volatile. Born as Allison and Ann Daddow, the sisters had left a trail of chaos across several states. In 2008, they opened a yoga studio chain in Florida. For a time, they lived lavishly, but behind the peaceful image of incense and stretching mats was a reality filled with dysfunction, bankruptcy, lawsuits, unpaid debts, angry customers, and behind it all, constant conflict. People who knew them spoke of regular alcohol-fueled fights, screaming matches, unpredictable behavior. Anastasia's ex-boyfriend, Keith Weiss, painted one of the most haunting portraits. He described a terrifying drive years earlier when Anastasia, enraged, kicked the steering wheel while Alexandria screamed from the back seat. They were going 85 miles an hour. He warned them then, "You're going to kill someone." When they fled to Hawaii in 2015, hoping for a fresh start, their old habits followed. Police citations, missed court dates, public fights. The final unraveling came during a camping trip. Anastasia was with her boyfriend, Federico Bailey. Alexandria wasn't supposed to be there, but she came anyway, and within hours, the two sisters had driven off together. No one saw Anastasia alive again. After the crash, Bailey testified that Alexandria's behavior unsettled him. She wore Anastasia's clothes. She never cried, never talked about what happened. Instead, she lingered near him, too close. He said it felt like she was trying to be her sister. The prosecutors said it was all deliberate. They pointed to their past. They said this wasn't just a tragedy, it was a murder. But Alexandria's defense pushed back. They painted a different picture. One where Anastasia, furious, unstable, grabbed the wheel, pulled her sister's hair, and caused the crash herself. They said Alexandria didn't want this. She wasn't in control. She was just as much a victim of that chaos. And in February 2018, Judge Cahill agreed. He ruled Alexandria not guilty, not because the story made sense, not because it was easy to believe, but because, in his eyes, the evidence pointed to a physical struggle, not a calculated act of murder. Still, the doubts never went away. September 3rd, 1999, Ontario's Highway 401, North America's busiest roadway, hummed with routine. Cars headed to work, trucks moved goods, the skies above Windsor were calm. Nothing unusual, nothing alarming, until everything changed. Just after 8 a.m., near the Manning Road overpass, something rolled in like a silent threat. Fog. Not a gentle mist or morning haze. This was a wall of white, so thick drivers could barely see a meter in front of them. There had been no warnings, no alerts, just the sudden loss of sight, and then the sound. Metal on metal. A tractor trailer, barely visible, began to slow. The truck behind it was following too close. It never had a chance to stop. It jackknifed across the highway. In the fog, no one saw it coming. One crash triggered another, then another. Within minutes, 5 separate pileups erupted in both directions. 87 vehicles. Fires broke out. Explosions ripped through the fog. One officer later described it as a massive fireball. It wasn't a highway anymore, it was a battlefield. 7 people died instantly. 1 more passed away later in the hospital. 45 others were injured, some severely. The fire was so intense that cars fused together. Victims were trapped inside, unable to escape the heat. A few made desperate attempts to flee on foot, only to vanish into the fog. Others screamed for help, their voices barely audible over the chaos. Constable Lee Bate of the Ontario Provincial Police was supposed to leave early that day for a softball tournament. But when the call came in, she raced toward the fog, unaware of what waited inside. She noticed a strange mist rising from the fields, something that didn't feel right. Without hesitation, she drove in reverse up a westbound ramp. Dispatchers confused, but it was the fastest way in. What she found defied belief. Vehicles stacked on top of each other, flames reaching skyward, people crying out, some in shock, others injured and dazed. Then, an explosion. Just 25 meters away, a firefighter threw her to the ground, shielding her from the blast. She never learned his name, she never forgot his face. She made it to her ball game that weekend. But every September 3rd, she remembers what she saw, what she heard, what she'll never forget. Just a kilometer away, Kirk Wallstead was feeding his peacocks when the sound of crashing metal shattered the quiet. He was a lawyer then, now the deputy mayor of Lakeshore. He ran toward the highway. His father and brother had already gotten there. They pulled injured passengers from cars and carried them across fields. On his father's property, under the shade of a tree, they set up a makeshift triage. Some lay bleeding. Some waited, silently, for word on loved ones who would never come. And still, more cars kept crashing. No one knew how big the disaster really was. The fog swallowed everything. What made it worse, what made it unforgivable, was that the weather system at Windsor Airport failed that morning. It didn't register the fog. No alert was issued. No one was warned. That failure may have cost lives. Highway 401, even before that day, had a reputation. Built in the 1950s and 60s, it was long, flat, and straight, perfect for highway hypnosis. 2 narrow lanes in each direction, gravel shoulders, a skinny median. Locals didn't call it Highway 401, they called it Carnage Alley. By the time the fog rolled in that Friday, 22 people had already died on that stretch in 1999 alone. Just days earlier, Ontario's transportation minister had described the highway as pleasant to drive. Gary McNamara, then deputy mayor of Tecumseh, got the call during his commute. He rushed to the scene and stood frozen, watching flames rise from twisted steel. Some people couldn't be rescued. One young woman was trapped inside her car. Telling her family she hadn't made it was one of the hardest things he'd ever done. The cleanup took days. The entire stretch had to be repaved. The government made changes, but to many, it felt like too little, too late. The coroner's inquest recommended 25 safety measures. Lawsuits followed. In 2004, Ontario launched a $322 million upgrade to the corridor. It wasn't completed until 2010. But even then, not all of the highway had changed. By 2016, vast sections remained just as dangerous. And in 2017, another crash. 2 more lives lost. That tragedy reignited public fury. High-tension cable barriers were added. Eventually, residents pushed hard enough that full concrete barriers were installed in certain areas. By 2023, some of those sections were finally finished. But the work, slow, costly, incomplete, still wasn't done. As of 2024, crews are still trying to make that stretch of highway safer.
Celebrating her 21st birthday, killed in a horrific one-car crash on the Williamsburg Bridge. The man behind the wheel, a city traffic agent. He is now charged with DWI in the death of Amanda Miner.
It was March 16, 2017 in New York City. Amanda Miner had just turned 21. She was home in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, taking a break from Lafayette College in Pennsylvania, where she was studying to become a social worker. That evening, she celebrated her milestone birthday the way so many young people do, surrounded by family, taking in the Broadway show Wicked, sharing dinner, and later meeting friends in Manhattan. But Amanda never made it home. At around 3:15 a.m., she climbed into the back seat of a gray Infiniti G37, thinking she was in safe hands. Behind the wheel was 26-year-old Stephen Hoy, an off-duty NYPD traffic enforcement agent. In the passenger seat sat his colleague, 24-year-old Michael Camacho. Amanda trusted them. She believed she was simply catching a ride back to Brooklyn after a night of celebrating. What she didn't know was that Hoy had been drinking heavily, 8 shots of vodka and 2 mixed drinks. His blood alcohol level was 0.12, far above the legal limit. Worse, he wasn't just drunk, he was reckless. On the Williamsburg Bridge, where the speed limit is just 35 miles per hour, Hoy pushed the Infiniti to a staggering 111 miles per hour. The car roared through the night, headlights blurring, the city racing by in a haze. And then, in an instant, everything shattered. Hoy lost control. The car slammed into a divider, then smashed into a support pillar with such force that the vehicle ripped apart, splitting into pieces like paper under a blade. Amanda, who wasn't wearing a seatbelt, was thrown from the wreckage. The impact was catastrophic. Emergency crews arrived quickly, but it was already too late. Amanda was declared dead at the scene. Just hours before, she had been alive, joyful, and full of plans. Now her family was waking up to their worst nightmare. Amanda's mother, Virginia Cabrera Minor, stood outside their Brooklyn home in disbelief. Just the night before, she had celebrated her daughter's 21st birthday. Now she was telling reporters through tears, "She's gone. She was a wonderful girl, my youngest. We just celebrated her birthday, and now I'll never see her graduate." Her professors remembered her as a student who radiated kindness. Friends described her as driven and compassionate. When the case went to court, Amanda's older sister Linda broke down. She told the judge, "I am completely heartbroken. I no longer have a sister. I just want to be with my sister." Her father, Jeffrey, stood holding a photo of Amanda, pleading with Hoy to carry forward the positive energy Amanda had given to others. The pain in that courtroom was unbearable, grief filling every word spoken by a family who would never see Amanda again. Hoy tried to explain himself. At the scene of the crash, he lied to police, claiming he'd only had 2 drinks. But prosecutors uncovered the truth. He had been drinking heavily all night. Eventually, he pleaded guilty to second-degree manslaughter and vehicular manslaughter. He avoided a full trial, but he couldn't avoid prison. The judge sentenced him to 4 to 12 years. In court, Hoy said, "I'm very sorry. I hope her family can forgive me. We were celebrating her birthday and it was a traffic accident." But Amanda's family pushed back. She was not celebrating with him. She had trusted him, trusted that he would get her home safely. Instead, his recklessness had destroyed her future. Even as Hoy's mother insisted her son was a good man, a father to his 5-year-old daughter, and not a heavy drinker, Judge Melissa Jackson made it clear. "You will serve time," she told him, "but your punishment will also be living with what you did. That will stay with you forever."
All of the teens died from their injuries. An OHP report says the driver was 16 years old. As for the passengers, 2 of them were 17, and the other 3 only 15.
It was March 22nd, 2022 in Tishomingo, Oklahoma, a town of just over 3,000 people where everyone knows everyone. That afternoon, 6 teenage girls, Gracie Machado, Brooklyn Triplett, Austin Holt, Madison Robertson, Addison Gratz, and Memory Wilson, piled into a small 2015 Chevy Spark during their lunch break. They were close friends, full of laughter, packed together into that little car, heading out for what should have been an ordinary, carefree ride. But they never came back. Shortly after noon, their car approached a spot locals simply called the Y, a Y-shaped intersection where State Highway 22 meets US 377. It's a confusing, dangerous stretch of road with a sharp curve and poor visibility. People had warned about it for years. That day, the warnings would come tragically true. The Chevy Spark came to a stop at the sign, then began to pull out onto US 377. At that exact moment, a massive rock-hauling semi barreled down the highway. Behind the wheel was Valentin Burton, a 51-year-old grandfather and volunteer firefighter. There was no time, no chance. The truck slammed into the side of the small car, crushing it and pushing it nearly 300 feet down the road. The force of the impact was devastating. The Chevy Spark, designed for 4, had 6 inside. Only 2 of them, the front seat passengers, wore seatbelts. When first responders arrived, the scene was heartbreaking. The car was torn apart, barely recognizable. The bright pink steering wheel cover was still visible amid the twisted wreckage, a gut-wrenching reminder of how young they were. 4 of the girls, including the 16-year-old driver, died at the scene. The other 2 clung to life for a few moments longer, but passed away shortly after reaching the hospital. All of them gone. Just like that, they were between 15 and 17 years old, with dreams and futures that would never be. Gracie Machado, her sister, later shared a photo of the 2 hugging, posting nothing but a broken heart emoji. Brooklyn Triplett, the cheerleader, the softball player, the loyal friend who always had your back. Austin Holt, bright, spirited, a member of Future Farmers of America who loved showing her prize hogs. Madison Robertson, a beautiful soul, her family called her, full of kindness. Addison Gratz, AJ, adored by her grandfather, who said a piece of his heart was gone forever. Memory Wilson, a young mother who somehow always found time for her little girl, no matter how busy life got. The truck driver, who had been wearing his seatbelt, survived without injury. He hadn't done anything wrong. No charges were filed. The investigation continued, but in truth, there wasn't much mystery, just unbearable sorrow. Experts pointed to familiar dangers: too many passengers, too few seatbelts. Research shows that the risk of a deadly crash skyrockets with each underage passenger in the car. And in Oklahoma, backseat passengers over 7 don't even have to wear a seatbelt. Maybe if they had. Maybe if the laws were stricter. Maybe. Tributes flooded social media, photos, memories, prayers. But amid the love, there were cruel comments too. People judging, pointing fingers about the seatbelts, about choices no one could take back. The families, already shattered, now forced to defend the girls they lost. It was January 22nd, 2019, in Birmingham, United Kingdom. Holly Burke, a 28-year-old police community support officer, had finished her day, slipped behind the wheel of her Ford Fiesta, and set off along Lordswood Road. She had no way of knowing her life was about to be stolen in the most brutal way imaginable. At nearly the same moment, across the city, a Renault Scenic tore down the Aston Expressway. Behind the wheel was 42-year-old Darren Ohm, a man with no license, no insurance, and a bloodstream poisoned with substances more than 20 times the legal limit. When officers on routine patrol spotted him speeding, they signaled him to stop. He refused. That refusal sparked a nightmare. A 14-minute pursuit across some of Birmingham's busiest roads. Ohm's reckless flight turned the city into his personal racetrack. In residential streets, he pushed 60 miles per hour through 30 zones. On the expressway, he soared past 100 miles per hour, weaving between cars, overtaking on the inside, and ignoring every rule meant to keep people safe. Police tried to stop him with a stinger device, but he blasted straight over it. CCTV cameras later captured him running red lights, forcing himself into oncoming traffic, and roaring past City Hospital at twice the legal speed. For 12 miles, he played roulette with strangers' lives, each turn of the wheel a spin closer to disaster. He later claimed he panicked, that he only wanted to pick up a friend and didn't want the car seized. But panic doesn't explain why he had a criminal record stretching back decades. It doesn't explain why, after prison sentences for robberies, firearms, and even smuggling abroad, he still chose to get behind the wheel high, unlicensed, and dangerous. What it does explain is this. He was running because he knew exactly where his choices would lead him. And he was right. Just before 11:30 p.m., Ohm approached the junction at Bearwood Road and Hagley Road. The lights glowed red. He didn't stop. He blasted through at nearly 80 miles per hour. At the very same second, Holly Burke's light turned green. She drove forward, trusting the rules of the road that every driver relies on. In an instant, metal met metal. Ohm's Renault slammed into the driver's side of Holly's Fiesta with catastrophic force. The crash was devastating. Witnesses watched in horror as emergency crews swarmed the scene. Police officers were already trying to save her, performing CPR, their hands pressing against a chest that should have never stopped breathing. Paramedics took over, but nothing could be done. Holly Burke was pronounced dead where she fell, her life stolen in a single violent collision. Ohm crawled from the wreck with only minor injuries. He lived. She didn't. Arrested on the spot, he was charged with causing death by dangerous driving, driving without a license, driving under the influence, and more. And when the truth came out, it painted a picture of a man who had spent his entire adult life as a danger to others, minus 44 convictions since 1993, weapons, robberies, smuggling, prison time. A man who had been free for mere months before once again destroying lives. In February 2019, a judge sentenced him to 9 years in prison with a 3-year extended license period, banning him from driving for 16 years. The court called him what everyone already knew, a serious danger to the public. It was the morning of November 22nd, 2023, just hours before Thanksgiving. At the Rainbow Bridge crossing near Niagara Falls, traffic crawled along. Border booths processed cars one by one. Everything looked routine, and then chaos. Out of nowhere, a silver Bentley Flying Spur came roaring down Niagara Street. Witnesses barely had time to react. The car sped through intersections, swerved slightly, then struck the median at full force. What happened next didn't look real. It looked like something from a movie. The Bentley launched into the air. A 100-pound machine lifted off the ground like paper and slammed directly into a border inspection booth. Then came the explosion. A blinding fireball lit up the sky. Smoke poured across the road. Metal flew. People screamed. The vehicle was instantly unrecognizable, reduced to burning wreckage. Border agents ran toward the flames, but it was already too late. Emergency crews rushed in. Sirens echoed over the bridge. Within minutes, the entire border shut down. All 4 crossings between the U.S. and Canada were sealed off. News helicopters circled. Social media exploded. Was it a terror attack? A suicide mission? Panic spread fast. But as the hours passed, the truth unraveled. 2 days later, the victims were identified. Kurt and Monica Vani, both 53 from Grand Island, New York, just 10 miles away. Not terrorists, not fugitives, just a married couple on their way to a concert. They had been together since 1995, built a successful hardware business, raised 2 kids, and were loved by nearly everyone who knew them. That morning, they had stopped by the Seneca Niagara Resort and Casino. Their destination was a Kiss concert in Toronto, one that had been canceled just hours earlier. Whether they knew or not, they got into the car and kept driving. But this wasn't just any car. The Bentley Flying Spur is a supercharged luxury beast, capable of hitting 60 miles per hour in under 4 seconds. It's a machine built for performance, not for weaving through city streets. Security footage later showed the Bentley tearing past traffic, ignoring at least 4 red lights. The crash injured a border agent in the booth, but miraculously, they survived. Kurt and Monica did not. They were killed instantly. From the moment they turned onto Niagara Street to the moment of impact, only 30 seconds passed. 30 seconds. What could have gone so wrong? Friends remembered Kurt mentioning something about the gas pedal weeks earlier. He thought something felt off, but no one knew if the car had ever been checked. Bentley Motors stayed silent. The 2022 model had a few recalls, but none related to acceleration, at least not in this version. A recall in 2021 had addressed pedal issues, but only on right-hand drive models overseas. A road safety engineer who studied the crash footage noticed something strange, a dark vapor trail behind the Bentley. It wasn't smoke from fire, it looked like burned rubber, a sign that the brakes were locked, that Kurt had been awake, alert, trying desperately to stop, and failing. The Vanis left behind 2 adult children, Kurt Jr., a former hockey standout, and Mia, 27. The family was known locally for their generosity. In 2014, Kurt and his father had handed out 250 turkeys to families in need for Thanksgiving. They gave to their community, supported neighbors, sponsored local causes. This wasn't the first time tragedy had touched their lives. Back in 1978, Kurt's grandmother died in a boating accident on the Niagara River. A poorly lit bridge caused the crash. The family later won a lawsuit. Now history had come back in the cruelest way imaginable, on the same river, near another bridge. There were no criminal charges, no villain to blame. The FBI ruled out terrorism within hours, but people were still left asking, how does something like this happen? January 26, 2025, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Center City pulsed with electricity. The streets were alive with chaos and jubilation as thousands of Eagles fans poured into every corner, voices ricocheting off glass towers, fireworks exploding like cannon blasts in the winter sky. Green smoke drifted over the crowd in thick clouds. Everywhere, chants of "Fly, Eagles, fly" filled the night, bouncing from building to building, blending with horns, cheers, and the rhythmic pounding of boots on pavement. For one evening, the city itself seemed to breathe with victory. Among the revelers was 18-year-old Tyler Sabapathy, a freshman at Temple University. He wasn't just another face in the crowd. Tyler was a gymnast prodigy, a young man whose talent had earned him more than 120 medals across competitions. Friends and coaches described him as fearless, relentless, precise, and disciplined. He was a young man whose body seemed to defy gravity, whose balance and control made difficult maneuvers look effortless. That night, caught in the electric current of celebration, Tyler moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had mastered the impossible. At the corner of 15th and Market, Tyler's eyes landed on a light pole, slick with condensation. Fans had already begun climbing it, daring one another higher, each ascent greeted with cheers. To most, it was reckless, dangerous. But to Tyler, it was instinct. Years of gymnastics, years of training his body to twist, rotate, and land perfectly, told him he could handle it. He approached, his movements fluid and calculated, almost like stepping onto a familiar apparatus. He gripped the pole, hooked his legs, and began to climb. The crowd cheered, seeing not just a fan celebrating, but a young man who seemed untouchable in the air. For a fleeting moment, everything seemed under control. Tyler's gymnast's precision carried him upward. The pole became his stage, the cheering crowd his audience. But in an instant, the celebration turned to horror. A sudden slip, merciless, sent him plummeting. Time slowed as his body twisted midair, arms flailing in a desperate, instinctive attempt to correct the fall. Then, the unthinkable. He struck the concrete below. The impact reverberated like a gunshot through the crowd. The roar of excitement turned instantly to a chorus of screams. Fireworks and cheers dissolved into gasps of terror. People rushed forward, helpless, faces frozen in disbelief as the night's joy collapsed into a nightmare. Paramedics fought their way through the chaos, sirens cutting through the winter air as Tyler was loaded onto a stretcher and rushed to Jefferson Hospital. Family, friends, and teammates gathered, clutching hope like a lifeline, praying over the machines that kept him alive. But the trauma was devastating. The brain injuries were severe, irreversible. For 2 agonizing days, they waited. And on January 28, 2025, Tyler Sabapathy passed away at just 18 years old. The loss sent shockwaves through Temple University, the gymnastics community, and Tyler's hometown in Toronto. The university's president struggled to articulate the grief. The loss of a promising young man like Tyler is both tragic and traumatic. There are no words that can make sense of it. Tyler wasn't only an academic achiever in exercise and sports science. He was admired for his discipline, his relentless drive, and his ability to push beyond limits. Professors saw a future leader. Teammates remembered his grit, his laughter, and his unmatched work ethic. His family remembered the boy who had left Toronto full of dreams, only to have them cut short in an instant. Video footage from that night still circulates online. Fans climbing poles, fireworks slicing across the skyline, the city awash in celebration. But for those who knew Tyler, the footage is unbearable. What was meant to be a night of triumph became a night of permanent loss. A boy who had seemed untouchable, whose body had mastered gravity, was grounded forever by a single tragic misstep. In the days that followed, tributes poured in from across the gymnastics world. Coaches, athletes, and even strangers took to social media to honor his talent, his spirit, and the bright, boundless energy that Tyler carried. Candlelight vigils were held. Messages of sorrow and remembrance flooded in. Yet the pain remained acute for those closest to him, the family who had watched their prodigy soar, only to see him fall in the most cruel of ways. It was a quiet night on Long Island, May 2nd, 2023. Route 106 in Jericho was almost empty. For 4 teenagers riding home in an Alfa Romeo, it was supposed to be a victory lap of sorts. They had just celebrated another tennis win, laughing and dreaming about futures filled with scholarships, championships, maybe even national titles. 4 kids with endless possibilities ahead of them. But as they drove into the darkness, something was waiting for them. Something that would change everything in a single, violent second. Out of nowhere, a Dodge Ram TRX came charging down the wrong lane. A 6,000-pound missile tearing through the night at nearly 95 miles an hour. Behind the wheel was 36-year-old Amandeep Singh, drunk, high on cocaine, and completely out of control. He wasn't just driving, he was hunting without knowing it, steering death straight toward innocence. The impact was catastrophic. The Alfa Romeo was crushed in an instant. 2 of the boys, Ethan Falowitz and Drew Hassenbein, both just 14 years old, never had a chance. They were gone before help could even arrive. Their friends, Zachary and another classmate, somehow survived. Broken bones, head trauma, glass embedded in their skin, trauma that doesn't heal when the body does. And Singh, he didn't rush to help. He didn't check if the kids were alive. He crawled out of his mangled truck and ran, stumbling into the darkness like a coward. Police found him hiding behind a trash bin reeking of tequila, mumbling nonsense, with blood that tested nearly twice the legal alcohol limit and laced with cocaine. This man had turned his truck into a weapon of mass destruction and then fled the battlefield. When the case finally hit the courtroom, the truth became even darker. Prosecutors revealed black box data from Singh's truck. At the moment of impact, he was still going 75 miles an hour. No attempt to brake, no hesitation, just pure, reckless speed. And yet, when he stood before the court in January 2025, after months of denial, his tears weren't for the children he killed. They were for himself. He sobbed about how his own life was over, as if he was the true victim. Imagine sitting in that courtroom. Imagine being Ethan's parents or Drew's parents, forced to listen as the man who stole their children's futures cried not for them, but for his own fate. Gary, Ethan's father, said it best. "This was avoidable. The state failed my son." And Drew's father thundered with rage. "He gave my son a death sentence and gave us a life sentence of grief." Even Zachary, the boy who had survived, called Singh what he was: a coward, a murderer. The sentence, 8 1/3 to 25 years in prison. A slap compared to the crime. Singh could one day walk free before he even turns 50. Meanwhile, Ethan and Drew are buried, their dreams silenced forever. Online, outrage erupted. How could someone so reckless, so dangerous, walk away with a punishment that light? How could justice feel so shallow when the crime was so heavy? It was Easter Sunday, March 31st, 2024, and northern Italy was bathed in soft midday light. On the A4A5 highway between Ivrea and Santhia, Traffic moved steadily, but a white Ferrari GTC 4 tore through the lanes like a missile. Inside were 40-year-old DJ Henryk Kastad, known in Europe's nightlife scene as DJ Style Q, and 21-year-old Ukrainian model Anna Kravska. Just hours earlier, they had left a nightclub in Sion, Switzerland, where Kastad had performed. Witnesses saw him leave with Anna in the early morning. Then, nothing. Anna stopped posting. No calls, no messages. Friends grew anxious. She had said she was going to Italy. Then she vanished. Kastad was a familiar face in clubs across Europe. Though living in Switzerland, his wife and 2 children remained in Kosovo. Anna, originally from Odessa, had rebuilt her life in Switzerland, modeling and documenting her journey on social media. She seemed full of life, but on that highway, everything would end in seconds. At around 1 p.m., near Alice Costello, the Ferrari hit nearly 200 kilometers per h, 124 miles per hour. One wrong move. The car veered. Impact. It slammed into a guardrail with such force the Ferrari split in two. Flames burst from the wreck. A wheel flew off and landed far from the crash. The front of the car, where both were seated, was annihilated. Emergency crews arrived fast, but it was too late. The bodies were unrecognizable. Only a gold watch near the driver's seat survived, Kastad's. The second victim couldn't be visually identified, but Swiss police had just received a missing person report. Anna's friends feared the worst. Among the wreckage was a second watch, small, elegant, seen often in Anna's posts. Her friends knew it was hers. That, paired with club witness accounts and the timeline, confirmed what no one wanted to believe. Investigators found no mechanical failure or other vehicles involved. The cause was clear. Speed. Nothing more, nothing less. Photos of the wreck spread online. Charred metal, twisted remains, silence. The road was shut for hours. Cleanup teams worked through scorched debris, every shard a piece of a larger tragedy. There was no conspiracy here, no foul play. Just 2 lives, 1 powerful car, and a moment that couldn't be undone. On a quiet Italian highway, the road ran out and took everything with it. It was just after midnight, on June night in 2023, when 5 people climbed into a red Toyota Corolla and drove off into the darkness. Juan Negrete Falls Road in Bochier, Victoria stretched ahead of them. Inside the car were 5 friends from the small town of Hamilton: 31-year-old Alicia Montebello, 17-year-old Lucas Garzolai, 15-year-old Joshua Elms, 14-year-old Megan Fox, and another 17-year-old girl whose name has never been released. They had spent the night together, teenagers and a familiar adult, caught in the blur between boredom, restlessness, and recklessness. Somewhere between 4 a.m. and 9:30 a.m., something went terribly wrong. The car veered off the road and slammed into a tree. By the time anyone found them, it was too late. 4 of the 5 were already gone. Emergency crews didn't arrive until hours later, around noon. The crash site had gone unnoticed in the early light. When they finally pulled the mangled Corolla from the woods, they found handwritten notes inside the car. Scribbled in teenage script were words like, "Drive safe and love people. Help people." A cruel irony scrawled in hope before the wreck. Megan Fox, just 14 years old, was among the dead. Her sister, Kayla Dean, posted a tribute online that pierced like a knife. "Rest in peace, my precious angel. Life isn't going to be the same without your goofy personality or that sweetheart." Megan had her whole life ahead of her, full of school dances, sleepovers, and dreams. Now nothing but silence. Lucas Garzolai, 17, had a passion for cars. He was proud of it. He even posted photos of modified vehicles on Facebook, his bio reading, "You only live once, so make it a good life." He had recently marched with pride in his town's Anzac Day parade, a member of the 314 Army Cadet Unit in Warrnambool. His friend Joshua Elms marched beside him. Joshua was 15. Kind, funny, a little impulsive, and full of energy. He loved motorbikes, drumming, and his younger siblings. He had just landed his first job at Kohl's. That night, before the crash, he attended a Christian youth program, something he rarely missed. But after coming home, he and his parents exchanged tense words. There was an argument. His mother, Leanne, said she told him goodnight and that she loved him. Moments later, she heard the door click open and close. "I'm just going for a walk," he said. She never saw him again. A week earlier, his father, Matthew, had warned him about dangerous choices, about risky driving, the wrong people. Joshua had confessed to doing car stunts, brushing it off with, "I'm not that stupid, Dad." But among those people his parents were worried about was Alicia Montebello. Her record wasn't a mystery. In 2015, she was caught driving an unregistered vehicle under the influence. Her license was suspended. In 2016, she was caught again, this time while disqualified. She received a suspended jail sentence. And yet, years later, she was still driving and still a danger. Police haven't confirmed who was behind the wheel that night, but they believe the car was flying down the dark road at more than 100 kilometers per h. A video surfaced on Snapchat, capturing a voice asking, "What speed are we doing?" A woman replies, 11, minus 130. Another voice, "Sweet." Moments later, the car hit the tree. Victoria Police Assistant Commissioner Glenn Weir described the crash as incomprehensible, the speed horrifying. He added that some of the teens likely weren't wearing seatbelts. The one survivor, the unnamed 17-year-old girl, was barely clinging to life and rushed to Alfred Hospital in Melbourne. In the days that followed, grief swept through Hamilton, a close-knit town of just 10,000 people. Flowers and handwritten notes were left outside Bainbridge College. A moment of silence was held at St. Mary's Catholic Church. Joshua's mother, Leanne, returned to the media not just to mourn, but to warn. Her voice cracked as she said, "Think of your loved ones when you leave the front door." She wasn't just speaking for her son. She was speaking for every parent who never got that last good night back.
The man who took the lives of 3 young siblings and their grandfather while drunk behind the wheel has been granted full parole.
It was September 27, 2015 in Vaughan, Ontario. The Neville Lake family was on a simple outing in their minivan. Inside sat 6 people. 65-year-old Gary Neville, his wife Nerissa, her mother Josefina Frias, and 3 bright young children. Daniel, just 9 years old. Harrison, 5, and little Millie, only 2. At the very same time, 29-year-old Marco Muzo was returning from his bachelor party in Miami. He had been drinking heavily for days, even continuing on his private jet back to Toronto. He knew he wasn't sober, but still, he climbed into his black Jeep Cherokee after landing at Pearson International Airport. Later, he would admit he thought he could take a chance. That single, reckless decision would shatter lives forever. Around 4 p.m., Vaughan Fire and Rescue received the call. 2 vehicles, completely wrecked, at the intersection of Kirby Road and Kipling Avenue. Muzo had blown through a stop sign, barreling at 85 kilometers per hour, about 53 miles an hour, through a quiet residential intersection. His Jeep slammed into the driver's side of the family's minivan in a violent T-bone collision. The impact was so devastating that over 30 first responders rushed to the scene, fighting desperately to save those inside. 4 were resuscitated at once, but it was too late. 9-year-old Daniel was killed instantly. Harrison and Millie were declared brain dead, passing away shortly after in the hospital. Their grandfather Gary didn't make it either. Nerissa and Josefina survived, but their bodies carried the scars. Their souls carried even more. Witnesses at the scene watched in disgust as Muzo stumbled around, unable to stand, his body reeking of alcohol, his bladder uncontrollably released. Later, tests showed his blood alcohol level was almost 3 times the legal limit. He was arrested on the spot. That night, news stations flashed images of the mangled van across Canadian screens. Jennifer Neville Lake, the children's mother, recognized it immediately. She was taken to the hospital, where she identified the lifeless bodies of her children and her father. In one afternoon, she lost her entire world. The country erupted in shock and outrage. How could someone with a record of reckless behavior, 10 past speeding violations, and even a prior arrest for public intoxication, still be on the road? In February 2016, Muzo pleaded guilty to 4 counts of impaired driving causing death and 2 counts of causing bodily harm. By March, he was sentenced to 10 years in prison and handed a 12-year driving ban. It was the harshest sentence in Canadian history for a first-time impaired driving conviction. But for Jennifer, and for the millions watching, no sentence could ever measure up to the lives stolen that day. Muzo's time behind bars was cushioned in a minimum security facility. He applied for parole in 2018 but was denied. By 2020, he was granted day parole. By 2021, he walked free, serving less than half of his sentence. His release carried restrictions, but to many, it felt like justice had barely been served. For Jennifer, the toll only deepened. She revealed that at the time of the crash, she had been pregnant, but the trauma led to a miscarriage. Her husband, Edward Lake, fell into an abyss of despair. He often described his existence as living in a nightmare, consumed by grief he could not escape. On June 20th, 2022, just one day after Father's Day, Edward was found dead at the age of 49. Jennifer shared a heartbreaking message. "My children's father, Edward Lake, has joined our kids so they can play together forever." Her pain turned into purpose. Jennifer started a nonprofit called Many Hands Doing Good to support children living with trauma. Yet every year, she still visits her children's graves, placing their untouched lunchboxes there, writing what grade they should be in, reminding the world of the futures that were stolen. Even after Muzo's release, petitions spread across the country, calling for his wealthy family's name to be stripped from buildings they had funded. But hospitals and institutions refused, including Sick Kids Hospital, the very place where 2 of her children had been pronounced dead. Muzo himself issued a statement in 2020 saying, "I was careless and irresponsible. I will live with this for the rest of my life." But those words, hollow to many, could never balance the scales of justice.
It's time to go out. Guys gonna be going down. We are going to Dreams in the next few minutes. It's gonna be going down.
It was the early morning of November 8, 2020 in Harare, Zimbabwe. Inside a Rolls-Royce Wraith, a sleek, powerful machine worth $500,000, sat 4 people who had no idea their lives were minutes from ending in fire and screams. At the wheel was Genius Kadungure, known to thousands as Ginimbi, one of Zimbabwe's most iconic public figures. He had just left his mansion in Domboshava after a night at Dreams nightclub, a venue he owned. It had been a night of flashing lights and flowing champagne, a celebration for Moana. Michelle Amuli, a rising fitness coach and influencer who had just turned 26. She was in the car, glowing from the night's festivities. Alongside her were 2 others, Lumumba Karim, a Malawian businessman with a shadowy past, and a woman from Mozambique, known only as Alicia. Hours earlier, Ginimbi had posted to Instagram his last ever story telling his 600,000 followers they were heading out to continue the party. As the Rolls-Royce glided through the dim streets around 5 a.m., witnesses say the car picked up speed. One man, Danny Kawanga, was driving along Borrowdale Road when he saw it, the Wraith hurtling past him like a silver bullet. Ginimbi attempted to overtake another vehicle, and then in a split second, everything went wrong. A blue Honda Fit appeared from the opposite direction. The Rolls-Royce slammed into it head-on. The luxury car spun out of control, smashed into a tree, and exploded into flames. Witnesses rushed to the scene. One of them, Kawanga, said Ginimbi had been thrown from the car during the crash. He was conscious, barely. 3 men pulled him from the wreckage and laid him on the ground. Within 5 minutes, his body gave out. The others were still inside, trapped. The doors were jammed. People nearby used tree branches and plastic buckets of water, desperate to save them. But it wasn't enough. Inside, Moana, Karim, and Alicia screamed for help. Screams that witnesses say still haunt them to this day. Then silence. By the time emergency crews arrived, it was over. The fire had done its worst. The bodies inside were burned beyond recognition. It took hours to remove the remains from the twisted shell of the once pristine Wraith. The aftermath sent shockwaves across the country. Ginimbi had built his empire from nothing, starting his first gas business at 17. By the time of his death, his fortune was estimated between £7 million and £76 million. He flaunted his collection of Lamborghinis, Ferraris, Bentleys, and lived like a king, throwing wild parties that reportedly cost up to $50,000 each. But behind the wealth was a cloud of suspicion. Ginimbi had been investigated for financial misconduct, and some of his cars had even been seized by authorities. He was also tied by family to Mary Mubaiwa, the estranged wife of Zimbabwe's vice president. His life was as controversial as it was glamorous. Then there was Karim, a fugitive in his own country, wanted for his alleged role in the infamous 2013 Cashgate scandal in Malawi, a scheme involving over £24 million in missing public funds. He had relocated to South Africa to avoid arrest. His presence in that car only deepened the mystery and intrigue of the tragedy. Moana's death was perhaps the most heartbreaking. She had built a name in Zimbabwe's entertainment world, featured in music videos, active on social media, admired by many young women. As for Alicia, no one knows much. Her full identity remains largely a mystery. One witness later said Ginimbi had tried to return to the wreckage, trying to pull his friends out, but the explosion came too fast. He didn't stand a chance. It was February 21st, 2025. On the MacArthur Causeway, 19-year-old Gabriela Alejandra Rios Flores sat quietly inside her Jeep Wrangler. Only hours earlier, she had been laughing with friends at the South Beach Wine and Food Festival. Now, her car had stalled in the westbound lanes, and a police officer had helped her push it to the shoulder. Gabriela, an international student from El Salvador, was calm. She waited for help, believing the danger was behind her. She had come to the United States with a purpose, studying communication arts at Florida International University, determined to build a brighter future. With her were two other FIU students, Daniel Khan, 18, and Mudassir Ali, 19. They stood close by, chatting and waiting, but then everything changed. A silver Polestar Model 2 came tearing down the road, its headlights slicing through the night. Behind the wheel was 24-year-old Nicholas Devin Robinson. It was his birthday, and instead of celebrating with restraint, he had been drinking heavily in South Beach. A Miami Beach K-9 officer who had just helped Gabriela move her Jeep saw it first. Robinson's car swerving wildly, barreling toward them. He barely had time to react before the sound of screeching tires and tearing metal split the night. Robinson clipped a cement divider and then slammed directly into the back of Gabriela's Jeep. With a force so violent it hurled the vehicle across another divider and into the eastbound lanes. The Jeep flipped, twisting in midair before slamming onto the pavement. Inside, Gabriela didn't stand a chance. She was thrown from the car, landing on the asphalt near the wreckage. Emergency crews rushed her to Jackson Memorial Hospital's Ryder Trauma Center, but her injuries were too severe. Despite every effort, she didn't survive. Daniel Kahn's memory of the crash is fragmented. He later said he remembered only the lights and the speed of the oncoming car, then the sharp realization that his arm was broken. His forearm was shattered, leaving him unable to stand. Mudassir Ali wasn't physically injured, but his voice broke as he said later, "She was a very good friend of ours. I cannot process this. We want justice." And then there was Robinson, the man behind the wheel. When officers pulled him over, he seemed oblivious. Confused, almost arrogant, he asked, "Why are you stopping me? It's my birthday. Did you get the other car?" Police noted his slurred speech, his bloodshot eyes, the stench of alcohol hanging off him. At the station, he vomited and refused a blood test. A warrant had to be issued on the spot. His blood was drawn and the evidence confirmed what was already obvious. He was driving drunk, reckless, and deadly. The crash shut down the causeway for hours. Miami woke up to the news of a promising young student killed, her dreams erased in seconds. For Gabriela's family in El Salvador, the pain was unimaginable. They had sent their daughter abroad for a future, and now they were preparing to bury her. Their attorney vowed to pursue justice to its fullest extent. In court, Judge Mindy S. Glazer made it clear, this was no accident. This was a choice. Robinson had driven nearly triple the speed limit, impaired on a busy causeway. She called the case serious, setting his bond at $200,000 and ordering house arrest if he was released. His lawyer entered a not guilty plea, buying time, waiting for evidence. But the charges piled high: vehicular homicide, manslaughter while impaired, reckless driving causing injury, impaired driving causing serious injury. For Gabriela's friends, no legal language could capture the loss. Daniel Kahn put it simply, "She was my friend, and I lost her. I hope the state attorney takes this case to the fullest and gives us justice. But the truth is, justice can't bring her back."
Tonight, a community is grieving. A popular family travel influencer died after being involved in a car accident in Mexico.
It was March 6th, 2025, a day meant for sunshine and celebration. Elise Caffey, a fearless family travel influencer from Utah, had just arrived in Cancun, Mexico with her husband Dan. They weren't filming or sharing content. They were simply guests at a wedding, taking a rare moment to be just a couple. No kids, no cameras. Elise, known online as 3 Kids Travel, had inspired thousands by proving that family life didn't mean sacrificing adventure. But this time, the adventure would end in tragedy. They were in a hired vehicle, cruising through the city. Then, without warning, a truck carrying hot asphalt lost control. In seconds, a 10-car pileup exploded into chaos. Their car was hit the hardest. It flipped violently and landed in the worst possible position. And then came the asphalt. Boiling black liquid poured into the wreck. Elise was trapped underneath, burned by the scorching flood. The crash had happened just outside a hospital, but even being steps away from help couldn't stop what was unfolding. The heat was so intense, medical workers struggled to reach her. Dan survived without injury. Their driver, Luis, died at the scene. Elise clung to life as paramedics worked quickly to stabilize her. She was rushed into care, sedated, placed on life support. Her face remained untouched, a small mercy. Back home, her family began updating Elise's followers. The tone was desperate but hopeful. Posts spoke of severe burns, and prayers poured in from around the world. 2 days later, Elise was flown to Salt Lake City and admitted to the University of Utah's burn unit. Doctors did everything they could. Multiple surgeries, round-the-clock care, but her condition remained critical. Her daughters visited her bedside, gently brushing and braiding her hair. Dan never left her side, playing guitar softly, singing through tears, hoping she could hear him. But time was slipping away. On March 12th, 6 days after the accident, her family shared the heartbreaking news. Elise had passed. She held on for as long as she could and fought so hard, they wrote. The post was filled with sorrow, but also gratitude that she made it home, that she said goodbye, that everything possible had been done. They ended with hope. We believe in eternal families and know we'll see her again. But the heartbreak didn't end there. Luis, the driver who lost his life, left behind a wife and 2 teenage daughters. Elise's family launched a GoFundMe in his honor. Over $64,000 was raised, not out of obligation, but because Elise had cultivated a community that cared. She had always said families should chase joy. That life was for living, not waiting. Her photos captured that spirit. Barefoot on beaches, snacks in hand, children clinging to her legs, adventure always close behind. She never claimed it was easy. She just believed it was worth it. And now, she's gone.
Breaking news right now. We just learned 3 GCU students were killed in a deadly wrong-way crash this morning on the I-17 north of the Valley.
On October 10th, 2022, Interstate 17 near New River stretched quiet through the desert. 3 college roommates were on their way north for a simple adventure, to watch the sun rise over the Grand Canyon. It should have been the kind of carefree trip that becomes a lifelong memory. Instead, it turned into one of Arizona's most haunting tragedies. Out of the darkness came a silver vehicle, barreling down the wrong side of the freeway. Behind the wheel was 27-year-old Vincent Ian Acosta. He wasn't tired. He wasn't lost. He was drunk. His blood alcohol content nearly twice the legal limit at 0.129, with marijuana in his system. Drivers who saw him weaving across the lanes frantically called 911. Some tried flashing their headlights, hoping to warn others. But before help could arrive, it was already too late. The Honda Accord carrying the 3 students never stood a chance. The impact was sudden, violent, an explosion of steel and glass that echoed through the desert silence. By the time first responders arrived, 2 lives were already gone. 18-year-olds Abana Abi Hoffman and Magdalene Maggie Ogden died instantly. Their roommate, 19-year-old Elaine Hunter Balberti, was rushed to the hospital, but her fight ended days later. They weren't just victims, they were best friends. Roommates bound together by dreams bigger than themselves. Abby and Maggie had left their small town of Clarkston, Washington, eager to start fresh at Grand Canyon University. Elaine had come from Hawaii, the first in her family to pursue college, carrying the pride and hopes of her community. 3 futures that could have stretched for decades were stolen in seconds, and like in so many of these tragedies, the man who caused it lived. When investigators reconstructed the crash, the truth was unbearable. Acosta had been driving the wrong way for miles, unchecked, with nothing to stop him. That stretch of I-17 had no median barriers, no fencing, no safeguards to prevent disaster. Locals had complained about it for years. Their warnings had gone unanswered until the inevitable happened. The case dragged on for nearly 2 years, while the families carried grief that time could not dull. Bedrooms remained untouched, waiting for children who would never come home. Birthdays passed uncelebrated. Graduation gowns remained unworn. In January 2025, the courtroom fell silent as the judge delivered words no parent ever wants to hear. There is no sentence I can hand down that will do what every one of you wishes, to bring your daughters back. Acosta pled guilty to 3 counts of second-degree murder. His punishment? 22 years in prison. With time served, he could walk free again while still middle-aged. The families will never get that kind of reprieve. Maggie's father said it felt like his heart had been stolen. Abby's stepfather described her as a bright light extinguished far too soon. Elaine's family held vigils by the ocean, chanting prayers into the waves for the daughter they would never embrace again. On the campus of Grand Canyon University, classmates gathered with candles. Morning peers they barely had time to know. 3 young women who had set out to witness a sunrise instead became memories, their lives frozen in photographs and unfinished dreams. And as cars rush along I-17 today, the question lingers in the desert air. How many more lives have to be lost before we realize these tragedies are never accidents? They are choices, failures, and silences that kill.
A police pursuit ending with a deadly crash and 2 children losing their lives. Thank you for joining us on a busy Friday night on the Fox 5 News. I'm Kathleen Bade. It started as a police chase before the suspect hit another car, then fled on foot.
It was a November night in Evansville, Indiana, November 29th, 2017. A young mother, 23-year-old Janie Carter, had just left her mother's house with her partner, 26-year-old Terrence Barker, and their 2 little ones, 2-year-old Princess and 7-month-old Prince. Before pulling out, Janie carefully buckled her children into their car seats in the back of their beat-up 2003 PT Cruiser. She leaned over and kissed them both, a quiet promise of safety. Terrence sat down beside her in the passenger seat, but just blocks away, fate was already racing toward them. Around 7 p.m., Evansville police noticed a black 2017 Chevy Impala parked near Bayard Park Drive. A quick check of the plates revealed they didn't match the car. Officers stepped in for a routine check. That's when everything snapped. 2 men bolted back into the Impala, the driver slamming the accelerator down hard. His name was Frederick McFarland. The chase barely lasted half a mile, but in that short, violent stretch of road, the Impala roared to 74 miles per hour. And then came the intersection. Monroe Avenue and Linwood Avenue, 2 streets that would become a crossroads of life and death. McFarland blew through a stop sign at full speed. At the very same moment, Janie's PT Cruiser crossed into the intersection. The impact was savage. Metal crushed against metal, and in an instant, the family's car was hurled into a tree. The PT Cruiser twisted around the trunk. 7-month-old Prince was thrown from the car. 2-year-old Princess stayed strapped in, but the force of the crash was catastrophic. Terrence took the worst of it, absorbing the deadly blow in the passenger seat. Janie, broken and barely conscious, clung to life. Across the street, a neighbor named Tanisha Given heard the deafening collision. She ran outside and froze at the sight of the mangled car against the tree. Within moments, police swarmed the scene. Some thought the wreck was McFarland's car and approached with guns drawn. Then a voice pierced the chaos, faint and cracked. "My baby! My baby!" Prince was pronounced dead right there on the street. Princess was rushed to the hospital. She passed soon after. Terrence, unconscious and gravely wounded, died later from his injuries. In the middle of it all, Janie, pregnant at the time, was the only survivor. McFarland was taken into custody, and nearly 3 years later, he pleaded guilty to resisting law enforcement. He was sentenced to 15 years, but the pain his flight had caused could never be measured by years behind bars. Janie sued the city of Evansville, arguing the police never should have chased a car over something as minor as false plates. In 2022, the city settled for $1.75 million, careful to call it a compromise, not an admission of fault. When she entered court, she struggled to speak, her voice carrying the weight of trauma no mother should know. She had survived physically, but she lived with PTSD, haunted by that night. She gave birth to the child she was carrying, a daughter she named Miracle. Later, she welcomed a son named Legend. Her mother, Sarah Johnson, stood beside her, reminding everyone that the new children brought light, but the wound would never close. At the crash site, neighbors and strangers alike left flowers and toys at the scarred tree, the place where an ordinary family's life was torn apart in seconds.
Nikki Katsouras was killed in a horrific accident after speeding in her father's Porsche. Extremely disturbing photographs of her mutilated body quickly leaked and spread on many websites where she was dubbed Porsche Girl.
It was Halloween, October 31st, 2006, in Lake Forest, California. A 18-year-old Nikki Katsouras had just finished lunch with her family. She was a quiet, artistic college freshman who loved photography. But that afternoon, something changed. Without warning, Nikki took the keys to her father's Porsche 911 Carrera. She had never driven it before. Her mother, Leslie, saw her pulling out of the driveway. Just 10 minutes after her father, Christos, had left for work. Panic set in immediately. This wasn't like Nikki. Leslie picked up the phone and called Christos, her voice tight with fear. He turned around right away, called emergency services, and began searching for their daughter. But nothing could have prepared them for what came next. Around 1:38 p.m., Nikki was speeding down the 241 toll road, over 100 miles per hour. Witnesses said she was changing lanes when she clipped a Honda Civic. In a split second, everything unraveled. The Porsche spun across the median into oncoming traffic and slammed violently into a concrete toll booth. The impact was catastrophic. Nikki died on the spot. First responders were stunned by what they saw. The car was mangled beyond recognition. The scene was so gruesome, The coroner didn't allow her parents to view the body. They had to identify their daughter in other ways. But as horrific as that moment was, what followed would break the family in ways no one could imagine. Just days after the crash, Nikki's family was blindsided by a second tragedy. Graphic photos from the crash, taken by the California Highway Patrol as part of their investigation, somehow made their way online. These weren't leaked accidentally. Two CHP employees, Aaron Reich and Thomas O'Donnell, admitted to sharing the images. Reich forwarded them to friends. O'Donnell claimed he only emailed them to himself. Either way, the damage was done. The internet did the rest. The images spread like wildfire. They were posted on message boards, social media, and shared through email chains. People gave her a cruel nickname, Porsche Girl. Strangers mocked the way she died. Some created fake memorial pages laced with insults. Others used the photos for shock content. And then it got personal. Nikki's family started receiving the images directly, once in an email with the subject line, "Woohoo, Daddy. Hey, Daddy, I'm still alive." It was torture. Leslie stopped checking her email. They pulled Nikki's younger sister, Danielle, out of school after someone threatened to put the crash photos in her locker. What started as grief turned into an ongoing nightmare, one they couldn't escape. They tried everything. Legal notices, takedown requests, calls to webmasters. But every time they removed one image, another would pop up somewhere else, and the world wasn't kind. Online comments poured in. Cold, judgmental, cruel. People called Nikki spoiled, reckless. They said she got what she deserved. It was as if the internet had forgotten she was a real person, as if her family's pain didn't matter. Eventually, the Katsouras family took legal action. They sued the California Highway Patrol for negligence and emotional distress. At first, the case was dismissed. There were no laws to protect families from this kind of violation, but they refused to give up. In 2010, the California Court of Appeal ruled in their favor. The court said the family had every right to sue. What those CHP officers did wasn't just a mistake, it was a betrayal. In 2012, they reached a settlement, $2.37 million. It couldn't bring Nikki back, it couldn't erase what had been done, but it was something. A message that this kind of cruelty wouldn't go unchallenged. They hoped their fight would help others, that no other family would be put through what they endured. It was supposed to be an ordinary evening, January 31st, 2025, in Northeast Philadelphia, for 37-year-old Stephen Druitt, his fiancée Dominique Goods-Burke, and his 9-year-old son Ramesses. It had been just that, simple, familiar, a shopping trip at Roosevelt Mall, a quiet return home. Then, in a single heartbeat, everything fell apart. At 6:10 p.m., not far away, a twin-engine Learjet 55 lifted off from Northeast Philadelphia Airport, a medical transport flight. On board were 6 people, 11-year-old Valentina Guzman Murillo, her mother Leth, 2 pilots, a doctor, and a paramedic. Valentina had been in the U.S. for months, receiving treatment for a spinal condition. Now she was going home to Mexico. The plane climbed into the darkening sky, and then something went horribly wrong. In a nearby restaurant, 25-year-old Kasim Wangas was having dinner with friends. They were joking about the Final Destination movies. A deep, unnatural rumble rolled through the air. Then a flash, then fire. People ran to the windows. Some screamed. A jet had fallen from the sky. Medjet Flight 056 slammed into the ground just blocks from the mall. The impact sent fireballs and debris flying across entire neighborhoods. 4 homes were destroyed. Hundreds of buildings rattled. And amidst the chaos, Stephen's car, his family still inside, was struck. The flames consumed it almost instantly. When first responders arrived, they found Stephen's body still buckled in, lost to the fire. Dominique had somehow been pulled from the wreckage, but over 70% of her body was covered in burns. She was rushed to the hospital and placed in a medically induced coma, but after nearly 3 months of fighting, she passed away on April 27th. Little Ramesses survived, but barely. People watched, some recorded, few moved. but Wangus did. Without thinking, he ripped off his denim jacket, ran toward the burning boy, and threw the jacket over him, trying to smother the fire. Rameses was twisting in pain. His shoes had melted into his skin. Wangus grabbed him, ran to a nearby police cruiser, and screamed for help. Inside the car, the boy kept asking for his father, but Stephen was already gone. Doctors at St. Christopher's Hospital later confirmed the unimaginable. Burns covered 90% of Rames's small body. Wangus, still holding his scorched jacket, broke down during his ride home. "He's just a little kid," he kept whispering, as if saying it might make it less horrifying. The next day, videos of the boy's suffering began circulating online. Clips showing a child burning. It took weeks before journalists helped him connect with the family. Rameses had been moved to a burn unit in Boston. His mother, Jamie, finally spoke to Wangus. Her voice shook, but her words were clear. "You will have a seat at my table forever." Even in their grief, the family reached out. Alberta Amamira Brown, Rameses' grandmother, checked in on Wangus. He had saved her grandson when no one else moved. Wangus later attended Stephen's funeral. Alberta wrapped her arms around him, called him a hero. But the moment haunted him. "It sneaks up on me," he admitted. "Sometimes I see Rameses on fire again." It was a bright afternoon, August 4th, 2022, in Windsor Hills, Los Angeles. The clock had just passed 1:30 p.m. The intersection at La Brea and Slauson bustled with cars, buses, and people. Among them was 23-year-old Ashery Ryan behind the wheel of her silver Jaguar. She wasn't alone. Beside her sat her boyfriend, 24-year-old Reynold Lester. In the back, their 11-month-old son Alonzo cooed softly. And Ashery was pregnant again, eager to meet the baby boy they had already named Armani. They were on their way to a prenatal appointment. Out of nowhere, tearing through the street like a missile, came a black Mercedes-Benz. Witnesses barely had time to register what they were seeing before disaster struck. Behind the wheel was 37-year-old Nicole Lorraine Linton, a traveling nurse from Texas. She wasn't slowing down. She wasn't braking. Her car was moving at 130 miles per hour on a road with a 35 miles per hour limit. And the light had been red for 15 seconds. What happened next was captured by surveillance footage too horrific to forget. Nicole's car blasted through the intersection and slammed into Ashery's Jaguar with such brutal force that the car was torn in half. The impact set off a fiery chain reaction. Flames erupted, spreading across the intersection, swallowing car after car. 9 vehicles were caught in the hellish blaze. The roar of the fire, the explosion of gas tanks, the shattering of glass. It was chaos. One witness said it was as if a black cloud had swallowed the intersection. Another described the sound, like a bomb going off. Ashery, Reynold, little Alonzo, and baby Armani, not yet born. They died instantly, gone in the blink of an eye. 2 more lives were lost that day. 43-year-old Nathsha Lewis and 38-year-old Lynette Noble. Women who'd simply been on their way to the mall, their ordinary plans ending in unthinkable tragedy. In less than 5 seconds, 6 lives were stolen. And Nicole? She survived, bruised, burned, but alive. First responders pulled her from the wreckage and placed her in handcuffs at the scene. She's been behind bars ever since. The charges? 6 counts of murder, 6 counts of gross vehicular manslaughter. If convicted, she could spend the rest of her life in prison. As investigators pieced together what happened, chilling details emerged. Data from Nicole's car showed she had floored the gas pedal for 5 full seconds before impact, pushing from 122 miles per hour to 130 miles per hour at the moment she struck. The road had curves. She was steering, not unconscious, not frozen. Prosecutors argued she knew what she was doing, or at least enough to have stopped. Nicole's defense told another story. They claimed she suffered a sudden medical episode, something that made her disconnect from reality, that she wasn't truly in control. But the questions kept piling up. Why had she searched online just days before? Can you see your death coming? Why had she called her sister 4 minutes before the crash, anxious and rambling, sounding lost? Her family spoke out. Nicole's sister described a kind woman battling inner demons, a nurse dedicated to helping others, yet fighting a long, painful struggle with mental illness. But for the victims' families, none of that could explain away the devastation. None of it could bring back what was lost. A year later, on August 4th, 2023, the community gathered at the spot where the lives were stolen. The Slauson 6 Memorial was unveiled. Flowers, a bench, a small garden. Photos of the victims, including an ultrasound of tiny Armani, were placed with care. 6 doves were released, 1 for each soul lost in that blaze. And as the doves flew, those left behind asked the same question. How could this have happened? It was May 10th, 2025, in the rugged mountains of northern Spain. Along the twisting N621 highway in Leon, a convoy of Ferraris wound its way through the breathtaking landscape. Among them, a sleek black Ferrari 488 GTB, its engine humming with nearly 700 horsepower, piloted by a British couple. He was 78, she was 58. Both part of a 20-car rally for luxury car enthusiasts who had come all the way from the UK. This wasn't just a casual weekend drive. It was an elite tour, an adrenaline-fueled escape through scenic but dangerous roads. The N621 is infamous. Beautiful, yes, but unforgiving. Sharp turns, sudden drops, narrow lanes hugging cliffsides. One wrong move here and there's little margin for correction. But in that Ferrari, worth over $400,000 and capable of speeds over 200 miles per hour, the thrill could easily overpower caution. The couple had arrived in Leon the day before. Spirits were high. The group was looking forward to a picture-perfect drive through the mountains, engines echoing across valleys. But just after 1:45 p.m., something went horribly wrong. Witnesses remember the black Ferrari moving fast, too fast. It approached a curve, then veered, skidding toward the edge. In a flash, it was gone. The car plunged off the road and disappeared into the ravine below. Moments later, a call came in. A vehicle had gone off the cliff and landed in the Uso River. When emergency responders arrived, they were met with a grim and difficult scene. The Ferrari lay upside down in the shallow water, half submerged, its roof caved in, its once pristine body now twisted and crushed. Debris from the impact was scattered across the rocks and water. Inside the wreckage, 2 people were trapped, lifeless, pinned by the wreck. Reaching them wasn't easy. The riverbank was wild, thick with underbrush and steep inclines. Firefighters had to hack their way through just to get close. Hours passed as they worked to stabilize the car, remove the doors, and retrieve the victims. It took more than 6 grueling hours to recover the bodies and extract the shattered vehicle from the water. The silence of the river, the green stillness of the valley, made the wreck feel even more haunting. The names of the couple were never released, but officials confirmed they were British citizens. The car bore a UK license plate. They were part of the rally, alone in that moment. No other vehicles were involved. The cause? Still unclear. Some believe the Ferrari simply lost control around the curve. Others suspect the driver may have suffered a medical emergency. Local experts said it wouldn't take much. A split-second lapse, a twitch of the wheel, and a car like that, with that much power, would be impossible to rein in. Photos from the scene tell the story the survivors can't. The black Ferrari, half submerged, glass shattered, metal torn, resting in a river that now holds the echoes of that crash. The road above, silent again. The thrill of the rally gone in an instant. For the emergency workers, it wasn't just another call. Some described the rescue as one of the hardest they'd ever experienced. To spend hours waist-deep in water trying to save 2 people who couldn't be saved, it leaves something behind. The UK's Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office confirmed the deaths. They reached out to the families. News of the crash spread fast, from local bulletins in Spain to international headlines. Online, people shared their shock, their sympathy, their disbelief. And for those who knew the couple personally, the grief was sharp, sudden, and difficult to make sense of. This wasn't the first tragedy involving tourists in Spain, but this one felt different. A scenic rally, a dream car, and a road that demanded respect, all colliding in the worst possible way. The Ferrari was lifted from the river that same evening, battered and broken. Investigators continued combing the area, trying to piece together what had gone wrong.
We're learning more about the deadly crash that shut down I-20 in Kaufman County yesterday. 5 people died and a 6th person is in the hospital fighting for their life.
It was June 28th, 2025 in Kaufman County, Texas. For the McKellar family, it was the last stretch of a trip that should have ended safely in Fort Worth. Inside their Ford F-150 sat 3 generations. 52-year-old Zabar McKellar, a quiet, steady man, was behind the wheel. His wife, 45-year-old Christian, known to her loved ones as Sean, was at his side, her energy and warmth filling the truck the way it always did. In the back were their children, 15-year-old Case, a rising football star full of promise, and 20-year-old Evan, a college student with strength and intelligence beyond her years. With them, riding home, was their grandfather, 79-year-old Billy McKellar, a man with deep ties to East Texas, who had just attended a funeral in Tyler that very day. It was supposed to be an ordinary drive home. Instead, it became the moment everything changed. At the same time, barreling down the same stretch of interstate was a semi-truck driven by 27-year-old Alexis Osmani Gonzalez, companion of Florida. He was hauling under Hoper LLC. The affidavit later revealed the truth. He was exhausted, and at some point he fell asleep behind the wheel. His foot never touched the brakes. He was still moving at 75 miles per hour when the semi plowed into the back of the McKellar's pickup. The impact was catastrophic. The F-150 was crushed instantly, torn apart as the semi continued forward, colliding with two other 18-wheelers and several more vehicles, including a gray Jeep Compass. Emergency crews rushed to the scene. Police declared it a mass casualty event, but for the McKellar family, it was already too late. Zabar, Christian, their teenage son Case, and Billy were all pronounced dead at the scene. Their lives ended in an instant. The only survivor was 20-year-old Evan. She was airlifted to Parkland Hospital in Dallas, fighting for her life in the ICU. One of her feet had to be amputated. Though she lived, her road to recovery would be long and grueling. Another life was also lost in the chain reaction. 49-year-old Nicole Gregory of Dallas, who had been driving the Jeep Compass, was killed instantly. In total, 5 people were gone, and 1 young woman remained. Broken but alive. The devastation rippled far beyond that highway. Pastor Rodney McIntosh, who called himself an adopted son of the McKellar family, said through tears, "I don't know how you make sense of moments like these." Friends and neighbors remembered Zabar as strong and steady, Krishan as vibrant and caring. Their son Case had been the pride of North Crowley High School's football team, a young man who had just led his team to a championship. His classmates began planning a vigil in his honor. Evan, still fighting for her life in the hospital, became the symbol of resilience, even as her heart carried the unbearable weight of loss. Billy's friends mourned just as deeply. One of his closest companions, Von D. Mosley, recalled their decades-long bond. "We were like 2 peas in a pod," he said. "I'm grateful for the time I had with him." But behind the grief, questions grew. Why was that semi still on the road? Why didn't the driver stop? Investigators confirmed he had never hit the brakes. Hopper LLC already had a history of violations, including issues with drivers going over their allowed hours.
This afternoon, the man accused of leading police on a high-speed chase, then crashing into a car, killing 2 little boys. He was supposed to appear in court.
That did not go as expected.
It was December 8th, 2023, in San Diego, California. A quiet night on Interstate 805, where cars hummed steadily under the glow of highway lights. Inside a modest Honda sedan sat a family of 4. In the back seat were 2 little boys, 8-year-old Malachi and his younger brother, 4-year-old Mason. Their mother, Victoria, rode in the front passenger seat, still learning how to navigate life after losing her husband the year before. Behind the wheel was a close family friend, their nanny, guiding them safely down the road. Suddenly, headlights tore through the darkness. A BMW, barreling down at nearly 100 miles per hour, came out of nowhere. In an instant, metal collided with metal. The Honda spun violently off the freeway, slid down an embankment, and slammed into a tree before bursting into flames. When the smoke cleared, the unthinkable truth was revealed. Malachi and Mason were gone. Their lives ended in a heartbeat, while their mother and nanny clung to survival, broken and bloodied inside the wreckage. The driver who caused it all was no stranger to police. His name was Angel Velasquez Salgado, just 20 years old, unlicensed, reckless, and already known for running from the law. That night, he wasn't fleeing for robbery, drugs, or weapons. He was running from a broken headlight. Officers first noticed his car on 32nd Street, then tried to stop him when he pulled into a driveway that didn't match his registration. Instead of pulling over, he chose chaos. He hit the gas, tore through stop signs, swerved into traffic, and even rear-ended an elderly woman. Witnesses later said his speed felt unreal, close to 100 miles per hour. And with every second he stayed on the road, the risk grew heavier. The chase stretched across freeways like a nightmare with no brakes. Northbound on Interstate 15, eastbound on State Route 94, southbound on Interstate 805. Sirens screamed through the night, but no one could stop him. Finally, near the 43rd Street off-ramp, he lost control and veered onto the shoulder, straight into the Honda carrying Malachi, Mason, their mother, and their nanny. The aftermath was chaos. Flames lit up the night sky as emergency crews rushed in, but for the boys, it was already too late. Their small bodies couldn't withstand the violence of that crash. Victoria was pulled from the wreck, barely alive, while the nanny, burned and battered, fought to breathe. And Salgado? He ran. He stripped off his clothes and tried to hide in nearby streets as if shedding his identity would erase what he had done. But there was no escape. Police caught him just blocks away. Later, the truth unraveled. This wasn't his first chase. Just 7 months earlier, Salgado had fled officers in a different pursuit. He should have never been behind the wheel. Yet here he was again, destroying lives that had nothing to do with his choices. Prosecutors charged him with everything: murder, manslaughter, evading, hit and run, driving without a license. At first, he denied it all. But in August 2025, he admitted guilt, standing in court and finally confessing to what everyone already knew. He now faces 30 years to life in prison, awaiting his sentence. But punishment doesn't erase the silence left behind. Malachi and Mason's laughter no longer fills their home. Their father was already gone. Now their mother, a woman who has battled lupus since childhood, carries not only her illness and her injuries, but the crushing grief of outliving her children. The family's godmother, desperate to give them a proper farewell, started a fundraiser. Thousands poured in, messages of heartbreak from strangers who couldn't believe 2 young lives could be taken over something as small as a broken headlight. It was a warm September afternoon in Sardinia, Italy. Rolling hills, stone villas, and tight, winding roads framed the perfect setting for the Sardinia supercar experience, a luxury rally where Ferraris and Lamborghinis raced through the countryside like bolts of lightning. Among the exotic cars was a red Ferrari Portofino driven by 67-year-old Marcus Crowley, with his 63-year-old wife, Melissa, in the passenger seat. The Swiss couple from Wallace, near Zurich, shared a love for travel, speed, and each other. Marcus ran a successful logistics firm across Europe, and Melissa worked in HR at the same company. The supercar rally, priced between £10,000 and £21,000, was just another adventure in their storybook life. Ahead of them, a blue Lamborghini Huracan glided along the narrow 195 Salsitana State Road. Behind the wheel was Indian billionaire Vikas Oberoi, with his wife, Bollywood actress Gayatri Joshi, beside him. The road north from Fort Village to Morris was picturesque but perilous. 2 narrow lanes, no room for mistakes. Then came the camper van. Slow and steady, the white van became a roadblock for the roaring supercars. But patience was scarce that day. A dashcam, later revealed to belong to a German tourist, captured what happened next. The Lamborghini attempted to overtake the van, crossing a solid white line, illegal in Italy. At that exact moment, Marcus tried to pass both vehicles in the Ferrari. The Lamborghini veered into the Ferrari's path. In seconds, metal clashed. The Ferrari clipped the Lamborghini and lost control, while the Lamborghini slammed into the camper, flipping it onto its side. The Ferrari veered off-road, hit an embankment, and erupted into flames. Thick smoke rose into the sky. Trapped inside, Marcus and Melissa were heard screaming, but by the time emergency crews arrived, including an air ambulance, the Ferrari was a smoldering wreck. Neither survived. The camper's passengers, a couple from northern Italy, were shaken but alive. They crawled out and were treated for minor injuries. The Lamborghini had come to rest at the bottom of a slope. Gayatri Joshi was seen crying on the roadside, while Vikas stood nearby, frozen in disbelief. Police quickly launched an investigation. All 3 vehicles were seized. The dashcam footage showed the Lamborghini crossing a solid line. A key detail, though not formally charged, Vikas Oberoi was placed under investigation for double road homicide, an offense that could carry up to 7 years in prison. Yet, he was allowed to return to India days later. Meanwhile, footage of other rally drivers running red lights and breaking laws surfaced online, exposing the darker side of the event. What was sold as luxury began to look more like recklessness on parade. For Marcus and Melissa, the thrill became a tragedy. They had chased one more unforgettable ride and paid the ultimate price. A moment of impatience, a misjudged pass, and in an instant everything ended. The road was closed for hours. Investigators examined the wreckage, charred rubber, twisted steel, and the lingering smell of fire. In Switzerland, their co-workers mourned the loss of 2 lives once so full of motion, and now 2 seats in that red Ferrari remain forever empty, a haunting symbol of how even in paradise, speed and power can turn deadly in the blink of an eye. It was February 21st, 2025. On the MacArthur Causeway, 19-year-old Gabriela Alejandra Rios Flores sat quietly inside her Jeep Wrangler. Only hours earlier, she had been laughing with friends at the South Beach Wine and Food Festival. Now, her car had stalled in the westbound lanes, and a police officer had helped her push it to the shoulder. Gabriela, an international student from El Salvador, was calm. She waited for help, believing the danger was behind her. She had come to the United States with a purpose, studying communication arts at Florida International University, determined to build a brighter future. With her were two other FIU students, Daniel Khan, 18, and Mudassir Ali, 19. They stood close by, chatting and waiting, but then everything changed. A silver Polestar Model 2 came tearing down the road, its headlights slicing through the night. Behind the wheel was 24-year-old Nicholas Devin Robinson. It was his birthday, and instead of celebrating with restraint, he had been drinking heavily in South Beach. A Miami Beach K-9 officer who had just helped Gabriela move her Jeep saw it first. Robinson's car swerving wildly, barreling toward them. He barely had time to react before the sound of screeching tires and tearing metal split the night. Robinson clipped a cement divider and then slammed directly into the back of Gabriela's Jeep. With a force so violent it hurled the vehicle across another divider and into the eastbound lanes. The Jeep flipped, twisting in midair before slamming onto the pavement. Inside, Gabriela didn't stand a chance. She was thrown from the car, landing on the asphalt near the wreckage. Emergency crews rushed her to Jackson Memorial Hospital's Ryder Trauma Center, but her injuries were too severe. Despite every effort, she didn't survive. Daniel Kahn's memory of the crash is fragmented. He later said he remembered only the lights and the speed of the oncoming car, then the sharp realization that his arm was broken. His forearm was shattered, leaving him unable to stand. Mudassir Ali wasn't physically injured, but his voice broke as he said later, "She was a very good friend of ours. I cannot process this. We want justice." And then there was Robinson, the man behind the wheel. When officers pulled him over, he seemed oblivious. Confused, almost arrogant, he asked, "Why are you stopping me? It's my birthday. Did you get the other car?" Police noted his slurred speech, his bloodshot eyes, the stench of alcohol hanging off him. At the station, he vomited and refused a blood test. A warrant had to be issued on the spot. His blood was drawn and the evidence confirmed what was already obvious. He was driving drunk, reckless, and deadly. The crash shut down the causeway for hours. Miami woke up to the news of a promising young student killed, her dreams erased in seconds. For Gabriela's family in El Salvador, the pain was unimaginable. They had sent their daughter abroad for a future, and now they were preparing to bury her. Their attorney vowed to pursue justice to its fullest extent. In court, Judge Mindy S. Glazer made it clear, this was no accident. This was a choice. Robinson had driven nearly triple the speed limit, impaired on a busy causeway. She called the case serious, setting his bond at $200,000 and ordering house arrest if he was released. His lawyer entered a not guilty plea, buying time, waiting for evidence. But the charges piled high: vehicular homicide, manslaughter while impaired, reckless driving causing injury, impaired driving causing serious injury. For Gabriela's friends, no legal language could capture the loss. Daniel Kahn put it simply, "She was my friend, and I lost her. I hope the state attorney takes this case to the fullest and gives us justice. But the truth is, justice can't bring her back."
Tonight, Yavapai County Sheriff's investigators looking into answers about what caused a deadly crash near Prescott. Deputies say that 39-year-old Kristen Little of Prescott was killed when her car rolled down a cliff near Thumb Butte.
It was August 16th, 2024, in Prescott, Arizona. Kristen Little, a 39-year-old real estate agent known for her bright energy and adventurous spirit, had just celebrated her birthday. She was close to her family, especially her mother, Jinger Cutting, who still held on to memories of their recent girls' trip to Las Vegas. Laughter-filled days, snapshots of joy that now felt frozen in time. That evening, Kristen decided to do something she loved. She packed up her miniature German Shepherd, CJ, and drove toward Thumb Butte, a mountainous trail she often hiked with her mom. It was her happy place, a spot where sunsets stretched endlessly over the Arizona sky. No one expected it would be her final destination. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Kristen began the drive back home along a winding dirt road, steep, narrow, beautiful, and unforgiving. Somewhere along the route, something went terribly wrong. Her car drifted from the right side of the road, veered sharply left, and then vanished. It plummeted nearly 1,000 feet down a jagged cliffside. The silence that followed was eerie. No screeching brakes, no warning. When first responders finally reached the remote crash site, they found Kristen's vehicle mangled and twisted in the trees far below. Kristen had been ejected from the car. She didn't survive. Her body was discovered nearby, still and silent beneath the vast Arizona sky. It was already dark. The terrain was treacherous. Authorities made the gut-wrenching decision to wait until morning to recover her remains, but they didn't leave her alone. Deputies stayed overnight, guarding the site, making sure Kristen wasn't left in the darkness without care. But in the middle of the wreckage, one astonishing detail emerged. CJ, her dog, her constant companion, was alive. Against all odds, the tiny German Shepherd had been thrown from the car, but somehow survived. No major injuries, no burns, just shaken. He remained near Kristen, almost as if refusing to leave her side. When the deputies brought him back to Jinger, the moment was overwhelming. She clutched him tightly and whispered through tears, "God gave me CJ." It was the only piece of Kristen she could still hold. It was Kristen's Apple Watch that sent out the distress signal. The device detected the brutal impact and triggered an automatic alert. In such a remote area, that signal likely made the difference between days and hours in finding her. Jinger later expressed quiet gratitude for that small sliver of technology, as strange as it felt. Without it, the wait could have been even longer, the wondering even worse. Kristen wasn't just a daughter. She was a force. She loved the outdoors, the thrill of a hike, the calm of paddleboarding, the joy of having CJ at her side. She had built a respected real estate career, but never let go of the part of her that chased adventure. People in Prescott knew her, loved her. The outpouring of grief when the news spread was immediate and raw. Messages, flowers, and stories filled social media. Friends shared how Kristen made them feel seen, how her laughter made bad days better, how her presence lit up rooms. Jinger, still dazed in her grief, remembered their hikes through Thumb Butte, their early morning talks, the way Kristen always wanted to be outside, exploring. "She was the light of my life," she said, her voice breaking. "She put her heart into everything. The cause of the crash is still being investigated." Jinger and her husband, John, a retired police officer, plan to meet with authorities. They know it won't bring her back, but they need answers. Anything to make sense of the senseless. To honor Kristen, Jinger is organizing a celebration of life, an outdoor event near Watson Lake where those who knew and loved her can gather, laugh, cry, remember, and she's going further. She's working on a foundation in Kristen and CJ's names, one that could support rescue efforts and push for safety changes in the area. Thumb Butte, beautiful as it is, lacks guardrails along stretches of dangerous road. Jinger wants that to change. She doesn't want any other mother standing where she stood. The heartbreak is immense. The hole Kristen leaves behind feels impossible to fill. But her story, her energy, her love for nature, her connection with her dog and her family won't fade. It was July 16th, 2003 in Santa Monica, California. Arizona Avenue had been transformed into a lively farmer's market. A sea of colorful produce stands and cheerful chatter. Families strolled between vendors, children tugged at their parents' hands, and elderly couples soaked in the sunshine. Around 9,000 people were expected that day. The street was closed to traffic, creating what felt like a safe, peaceful space. But that peace shattered in an instant. At about 1:47 p.m., 86-year-old George Russell Weller was behind the wheel of his 1992 Buick LeSabre, heading west on Arizona Avenue. As he neared the barricaded market, something went horribly wrong. His car struck a Mercedes-Benz waiting at a crosswalk, but instead of stopping, Weller's foot pressed harder on the accelerator. Witnesses watched in disbelief as the Buick veered around the barricades and roared into the crowd. The massive car became a weapon, barreling through the heart of the market at terrifying speed. 40, 60, maybe even 70 miles per hour, covering nearly 1,000 feet in just seconds. Stalls splintered like matchsticks. Tables were flattened. Produce, bags, shoes, and bodies were thrown into the air. Some described it as watching a tank tear through the street. The chaos was beyond comprehension. People screamed. Some ran. Others froze, trapped in the path of destruction. A small blue stroller stood abandoned at the curb, stained with blood. The stroller of a 3-year-old girl who didn't survive. Bodies lay where they fell. Red blankets covered the injured. Yellow tarps hid the dead. A red Buick sat at the center of the wreckage. Windshield shattered, metal crumpled. Weller's car finally stopped after a pedestrian landed on his windshield, blocking his view. A nearby bicycle officer rushed in and pulled Weller from the car. Witnesses said the elderly man looked lost, confused, like he didn't understand what had just happened. Some thought he seemed frightened. Others swore he was oddly calm, even hugging people after leaving the station later that day. When the dust settled, the toll was unimaginable. 10 lives lost, including the little girl in the stroller. More than 70 people injured, some forever changed. Melissa Cronin was one of them. Thrown to the ground, her pelvis shattered, spleen damaged, head injured. She would later write that even years afterward, her body would tense and her heart would race any time she stepped into a crowd. Emergency crews worked desperately, lifting Weller's car off survivors with the help of bystanders. News helicopters hovered above, capturing the grim scene. The destruction, the heartbreak, the stunned faces of those who had witnessed the unimaginable. Weller was taken to the hospital. Tests showed no alcohol, no drugs. He told investigators he'd hit the gas instead of the brake and panicked when he realized his mistake. His lawyer issued a statement. The family was devastated, deeply sorry. But the damage was done, and the sorrow rippled through the city. There were no immediate arrests. Police said Weller posed no flight risk. He walked with a cane. Investigators combed through his medical records, examined the Buick, looked for anything that might explain what went so wrong. There was no mechanical failure, no clear warning, just one terrible error that cost so many lives. The lawsuits came, more than 30 in total. By 2008, Santa Monica had paid $21 million to victims and families, and while Weller was never criminally charged, many were left asking how a man his age, with declining abilities, still held a license. The city installed stronger barriers at the market, $219,000 worth of reinforced protection, too late for those lost. A warning from a police officer 3 years earlier about the market's vulnerabilities had gone unheeded. The price of that delay was now clear. George Weller spent his final years under full-time care, passing away in 2010 at age 94. The crash wasn't an act of malice, but for the families who lost mothers, fathers, children, for the survivors who still carry the scars, the consequences were permanent. It was July 21st, 2024, in West Yorkshire, England. Shane Roller, 33, and his partner, Shannon Morgan, 30, had just finished a peaceful walk with their 2 young daughters, 9-year-old Ruby and 4-year-old Lily. The family piled into their silver Ford Focus, heading home along the A61, a stretch of road that should have been just another part of a regular day. But their eldest daughter, 11-year-old Poppy, wasn't with them. She'd chosen to stay behind in Barnsley, spending the afternoon with a family friend, Paul Heppel, and his daughter. But at around 3:45 p.m., the phone rang, and everything changed. Speeding down that same stretch of the A61 was a motorcycle driven by 56-year-old Christopher Barton. His wife, Janine, 48, was riding pillion. Reports later revealed that Christopher was trying to overtake another vehicle when it happened. He collided head-on with the Roller Morgan family's car. The crash was devastating. By the time emergency services reached the scene, it was already too late. All 6 lives, Shane, Shannon, Ruby, Lily, Christopher, and Janine, were gone. The road between Shaw Lane and Warren Lane was sealed off, but the horror of what had happened couldn't be contained. Superintendent Alan Travis called it a tragedy beyond words. Flowers began to appear at the crash site, candles, teddy bears. Tributes flooded social media, messages filled with grief, disbelief, and pain. "My heart just hurts," wrote Poppy's cousin Beth. "My heart is ripped into a million pieces," Shane's brother Callum said. But the most unbearable weight fell on one small girl. Back in Barnsley, Paul Heppel was left with a task no adult should ever face, telling a child that her entire world was gone. Earlier that morning, Shannon had called and asked if Poppy could stay a little longer. "She was having fun with our daughter," Paul later recalled. "We were just finishing dinner when her aunt got the call and ran out the door. Everything flipped upside down after that." In the days that followed, grief turned into action. Paul launched a GoFundMe campaign to support Poppy. The goal was modest, £3,000, just enough to help with essentials. But the world responded with something more powerful than anyone expected. Within days, donations surged past £70,000, then £300,000, then £482,700. Over 22,500 people gave. Paul made it clear every penny would go into a trust fund for her. Her Aunt Faye was listed as the official beneficiary. None of the funds would be touched until they were legally transferred and secured for Poppy's future. But money can't fix everything. The emotional scars, the ones no amount of funding can heal, remain. The crash scene had been so catastrophic that another driver, who wasn't involved in either vehicle, was arrested on suspicion of dangerous driving. He was later released on bail. The investigation continues, but answers are hard to come by. And what about Poppy? She's gone back to school. Paul says she was nervous, unsure like any child would be after such a loss. But she's finding her footing, slowly, carefully. Therapy has helped, so have the support groups. Organizations like Break have stepped in, along with Compass B, grief counselors, and family liaison officers who've made sure she isn't walking through this alone. She still loves football, still finds escape in music, especially Taylor Swift. Those small comforts, those pieces of normalcy, matter more than ever now. In one heartfelt update, Paul wrote, "Your generosity has not only secured Poppy's future, but has brought light during a very dark time. But the road ahead is long. Some days are heavier than others. There are questions that haunt. Why them? Why not me? The kind of questions that can't be answered, only carried." It was the early morning of January 12th, 2025, in Castleford, West Yorkshire. The temperature had dropped to a brutal -5 degrees Celsius, and the roads were glazed in ice, turning every turn into a risk. In the quiet of dawn, when most people were still asleep, 18-year-old Taylor Lupton was riding in the passenger seat of a white Volkswagen Golf. It was just after 6:20 a.m., a time when the world should still feel calm, but for Taylor, everything was about to change forever. Taylor wasn't just another young man. He had recently become a father, a boy from nearby Pontefract who was described as the kind of soul who could light up any room. Friends called him crazy sweet, a mix of energy, humor, and kindness. He had his whole life in front of him. But that morning, as he sat beside two 21-year-olds, a man and a woman, none of them could have known what the next few minutes would hold. They were driving down Weldon Road, a stretch locals had long whispered about, calling it cursed and dangerous. The car moved across a junction, but then something went horribly wrong. Witnesses said it was sudden, as if the vehicle had been yanked out of control by invisible hands. The Golf swerved violently, mounted the pavement, tore through a wire fence, and smashed into heavy bushes. The momentum didn't stop there. It slid down a steep slope, unstoppable, before plunging into the shadows of an oxidation tank at the Wallale sewage works. The tank was nearly empty, but deep enough to swallow the car from the road's view. By the time emergency crews arrived, the scene looked like a nightmare. The Volkswagen sat crumpled at the bottom, its windows shattered, one door wrenched open as if the car itself had screamed. Just yards away, they found Taylor's body. His two companions were pulled out alive and rushed to the hospital. But for Taylor, there was no saving him. Shock turned to anger when it was revealed the two survivors were arrested for suspected involvement in dangerous driving that may have caused Taylor's death. Locals stood in disbelief. One man recalled how you couldn't even see the car from the road. Another, 66-year-old Richard Iverson, said he'd seen crashes there before and had always feared that bend. That morning, he spotted a license plate lying on the footpath. He thought it was nothing more than a petty theft, only later realizing it was a clue to a much darker tragedy. As news spread, grief spilled out onto social media. Taylor's girlfriend, Megan, poured out her heart in a post that shattered those who read it. "You were my world. You made me better. I love you so much. I wish this wasn't real. I'll carry you in my heart forever." Friends wrote tributes filled with disbelief and sorrow. "Rest in peace, Taylor Lupton, you crazy sweet soul," Kira Reed said. "Just hours before, you were smiling, dancing, happy." Another friend added, "You were amazing, Tay. Never a dull moment. We love you." Soon, the crash site became a place of mourning. Flowers, candles, and handwritten notes covered the ground. A message from his great-grandmother read, "To my lovely great-grandson, Taylor, taken too soon." His parents left a note that simply said, "Love you so much, Mom and Dad." His siblings wrote, "Going to miss you, big brother." The heartbreak in those words painted a picture of a family ripped apart, of a daughter who would grow up without her father. Police later confirmed what many had feared. The roads were slick with ice. Visibility was poor, and there were no warning signs at that stretch of road. Photos from the scene showed the car's broken path down the slope into the tank, a chilling reminder of how fragile life can be. Taylor was gone before his daughter's first birthday, before he had the chance to live the future everyone believed he was destined for. And now, the investigation continues, but no answer will ever bring him back.